gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I want to be in that building on a Saturday night.
What is going on, gang? Welcome to HABS Therapy Day, votre émission de hockey hebdomadaire, interactive et 100% bilingue, focused on your Montreal Canadiens. No hot takes, no fake hype, just real talk. Pas de sensationnalisme, pas de rumeurs débiles, juste des analyses franches, réfléchies et bien sourcées. We love the Habs, but we're not here to drink Kool-Aid. On adore nos glorieux, mais on n'est pas ici pour les flatter à tout prix. This is a space for fans who want to go deeper. Tactics, trends, tough questions. Un endroit pour les passionnés qui veulent creuser. Tactique, tendance, débat intelligent. We've got sharp takes, not cheap takes. Des points de vue solides, pas de la complaisance. So if you're looking for a smarter way to talk Habs, sans le bruit, sans le bordel, vous êtes au bon endroit. This is Habs Therapy Day. Let's get into it. Bienvenue à Habs Therapy Day. On commence maintenant. Welcome back, guys. I see a few of you in the comments already. Run with Kings. Welcome, outdoor guys. Welcome to the show. If you are new here, thank you for joining us. It's been a while, but it's a pleasure to be back. It's great to talk to you. And I think we're going to go on a bit of a marathon here tonight. We're going to go until we're done talking about the Canadiens. There's no time parameters on us tonight. We're going to keep talking tonight. We're going to talk about the playoff series against Washington. We're going to talk about the Canadiens and their offseason needs. We're going to talk about the Dobson trade. We're going to talk about the Bolduc trade. We're going to talk about the draft. We're going to talk about free agent signings. We're going to talk about our expectations for next season. All of that stuff, guys. So we're going to talk about development camp. So yeah, let's do it, guys. Like I said, we do a show during the season called Habs After Dark. We go live after every Canadiens game. Obviously, the season's over, so we're not doing that anymore. We also do this show called Habs Therapy Day, and we've only been doing it sporadically since the end of the season, but we're back. And I want to cram a lot of stuff into a single show here. We haven't been on the air since we did our pre-draft preview with Jérôme Berube. That was a great show. That was really fun. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out after. It's a little bit late now because the draft is over, but it was a really fun conversation with a draft expert and a guy who really knows his stuff around the Habs prospects, well, the NHL prospects, and certainly the draft. So if you're here in the comments, guys, fire away if you have questions. I'm not here to exclusively just talk to you guys about the Canadiens, although I'm going to do that. I also invite you to ask your questions if you have them. Happy to have a discussion. In fact, I prefer it. I'd much rather have a conversation with you guys than just talk one-way direction at you guys. So if you have questions, if you have comments, we're also live up here on TikTok. If you want to join the show from TikTok, come on down to the YT channel, guys. We're here. It's probably easier for me to answer your questions and to respond to your comments on YT than it is on TikTok. So I will try to address all of you. And if you have good questions, I'll certainly use them to lead us into more conversation. But that's where we are. So give us a follow, guys. Tap on the subscribe button down below. Hit the notification bell. Check us out on Blue Sky and on Twitter. All the other socials, and give us a follow there. Help us grow our community. So without further ado, guys, let's get going. I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about, and hopefully maybe get your thoughts as well, on the series against the Washington Capitals. Outdoor Guys has a question. I want to know my opinion on the Dobson trade and his AAV and so on. Can you wait to talk about that, Outdoor Guys? I have a whole section on that. Can you wait till we get there, or would you rather me address it right now? If you can hang around, we're probably going to talk about it at great length later on. We'll talk about the Dobson trade. But if you really want me to talk about it now, if you're pressed for time, we can certainly do that. While I wait for your answer, I'm going to move on to the playoff series against the Washington Capitals. As we all know, the Canadiens unfortunately fell to the Capitals in 5 games. They lost that series 4-1. They were able to sneak into the playoffs by a point on the last day of the season. We all remember that as well. And as we're, certainly disappointed that the Canadiens didn't go further in the playoffs, I think we can certainly look to the fact that they made the playoffs. Okay, outdoor guys, I'll hit that in a little bit here. The first topic is the Washington-Montreal playoff series. Well, it certainly was a disappointment that they weren't able to push Washington a little bit more and certainly, make it to the next round of the playoffs. I don't think any of us can be upset at the fact that, that they actually made the playoffs. I don't think anybody would have expected them to do that at the beginning of the year. The playoff series itself, I think, is a positive. Despite the fact that they lost in 5 games, I think the experience that the young players would have gained from that series certainly will go a long way in helping them down the road and when the team sort of begins to achieve its goals as a perennial playoff contender or a perennial Stanley Cup contender. I think that the experience that they gained in that series will certainly go a long way in that ultimate goal. I think that the lack of experience and the youth of the Montreal Canadiens was the real deciding factor in that series. I think you've certainly been fed by the media a narrative about size and toughness, and I really don't think that was the issue in the series. You can point to guys like Alex Ovechkin and Tom Wilson and say that they were too big and physical for the Montreal Canadiens, but at the end of the day, it was the inexperience of the Canadiens that really cost them. The Canadiens certainly had the size to match up with the Capitals. They had the physicality to do that, but they didn't have the experience, right? It's one thing to be big and strong and competitive and physical. It's another thing to know when you can, bring that physicality and how to properly bring it in a playoff environment, right? And so, Josh Anderson is every bit as capable of handling Tom Wilson as anybody else, right? There's plenty of big physical guys on the Montreal Canadiens. You've got, guys like Goulet, you've got guys like Xhekaj, you've got guys like Struble, you've got, even, your forwards, you've got, Gallagher, who is more than capable of being physical. As I said, Anderson, these guys are all, big, strong, physical guys. But the problem is in order to be tough and physical at the NHL level, you need to have a level of experience to know when you can use that, when to use it properly, when not to use it. And with the refereeing in the playoffs, it's often difficult because, the veteran teams with experience know that they can push the limits a little bit further when it comes playoff time. It was awesome to watch, though. I think we may have a better chance this year, to be honest. Absolutely, outdoor guys. And I think the ultimate goal of the rebuild for the Montreal Canadiens is that they continue to improve as a group, right? They continue to get better. We all hope that the team is better next year and that they fare better in the standings. Although, if they don't, for whatever reason, make the playoffs, I don't think it's also the end of the world. I think there's a way for the Canadiens to improve and get better next year and still not make the playoffs. I don't really envision that. And I think they've certainly gotten better this offseason, regardless. But I do agree with you that I think the chances of the Canadiens making the playoffs next season are a lot more than they were at the beginning of last season, right? Going into last season, I don't think there's very many people that would have given the Canadiens, much of a chance of making the playoffs. This year, I think the expectations will be a little bit higher. Whether that's fair or not remains to be seen. But this series against Washington will certainly go a long way in giving those guys the experience to make the playoffs again, right? Learning what it's like to be in a playoff run at the end of the season, like through February and March and even April. and then what it takes to play in the playoffs once you get there. So getting back to this whole size thing, right? Lane Hudson was the best player for the Montreal Canadiens, despite being the smallest player on the ice. I think that Josh Anderson showed on multiple occasions that he's more than capable of being big and physical. The Canadiens are actually a bigger team than the Washington Capitals if you want to get down to the brass tacks and the statistics of it all. So, the bottom line on that series is that the Canadiens just didn't have the experience it took. The moment was maybe a little bit too big for them. They weren't, quite ready for it. They were getting to a playoff spot long before one would have expected them to. Not long before, but certainly sooner than anybody would have expected them to. And that was kind of, the moment. I don't want to say the moment was too big, but I think that the situation was a tough one to put those young players in. And while I don't think they got out muscled physically, I think they were intimidated to a degree by the physicality of the Capitals, and that they didn't know how to respond to the physicality that the Capitals brought and the playoff intensity that the Capitals brought. But I don't think that is an indication that the Canadiens aren't big enough or competitive enough. I think it's more of a case of them, again, being inexperienced, right? A little bit more experience allows you to know how to handle, to expect that physicality and know how to respond to it properly, going forward in the future. So next thing I want to talk about, guys, unless you have any more questions about that series, is I want to talk about the Canadiens' needs in the offseason. What do the Montreal Canadiens need, or what did they need heading into this offseason? And maybe I'll put the question out to all of you who are watching. What do you think were the Canadiens' needs? And the reason I phrase it that way is because, honestly, in my opinion, I don't feel like they quote-unquote need anything. And I think that's the attitude that the management is going into this offseason, or they've gone into this offseason with, is that, they don't need anything. Obviously, they'll look for opportunities to improve the team. There's certainly areas where the team is stronger or weaker than others. And, I think that they'll look for opportunities to respond to those, strengths and weaknesses, and to use those strengths to work on their weaknesses. But I don't think that Kent Hughes heads into the offseason. I don't think he ever deals from a position of feeling like he needs something, right? So this narrative that we've been force-fed from the media, who just, seem desperate to have us all believe that the Canadiens need to have a second-line center next year. They need to have a right-hand defenseman next year. Those are not needs. Those are weaknesses in the lineup that the management will look to address and will hope to address, but they're not going to, bend over backwards or deal from a position of desperation in order to respond to those concerns, right? They're not going to go out and make a deal that they're not going to overpay. They're not going to go out and make a stupid transaction just to get a second line center. If they can find a second line center at the right price that fits with their plan and their profile, they'll do it. We've seen that. Noah Dobson, right? That fit their plan and their profile. But they're not going to go out there and get a second line center or a right-handed defenseman at all costs, right? They're not going to go and pay an exorbitant amount of money to sign a free agent. They're not going to give up a huge amount to bring back a player who fits those needs. Kent Hughes, I believe, is the kind of GM who considers all possibilities. I don't think he believes that anybody is off the table, but at the same time, he's not going to make a deal that doesn't benefit the Canadiens, right? It's a deal that fits with their plan, right? We hear him talk all the time about bringing in players that can grow with the group, right? Players who can grow with the group, players who are age appropriate. They're not bringing in Sidney Crosby. They weren't bringing in Jonathan Toews. They're not bringing in Jonathan Marchessault. They're not bringing in these guys, right? they're not, they're bringing in guys who can grow with the group. They're bringing in guys who are in their 20s, right? This is their, the plan for the Montreal Canadiens is not to win the Stanley Cup this year, right? So there's no desperation to bring in, a second line center for this year. If they can find one that works and fits the mold, they'll do it. But they're not going to, go out there and be desperate about trying to find a second line center. If they go into next season with Kirby Dach or Alex Newhook as their second line center, not the end of the world. They'll still be a better team on paper than they were last year, and they'll still be advancing towards their ultimate goal, which is, improving on last year and eventually getting to the point where they're a perennial Stanley Cup contender. Without a second line center, another right-hand D and a goalie, these guys aren't going nowhere. Hard truth. Again, that's just absolutely, completely wrong. It demonstrates a complete lack of understanding about what the Canadiens' goals are, what their plan is, and what the rebuild is all about. The goal is not for them to win the cup this year. It's not even for them to win the cup next year. And it's not for them to win one cup, right? The goal is not to build up to winning a cup and then collapse everything down again. The goal is to become a sustainable and perennial contender for the Stanley Cup, right? If your goal was to win the cup next year, yeah, you need to have a second line center. Yeah, you need to have another right-handed defenseman. Yeah, you probably need to have a little bit more of a veteran presence. You probably need to have all of those things for next year, but that's not the goal. The goal is long-term, not short-term. So bringing in guys like Claude Giroux and going out and finding a second-line center at all costs isn't in the plan, right? And by being patient and by sticking to the plan, you never know what will happen, right? We talk about, everyone's talking about how the Canadiens need a second line center. I remember not so long ago, the Canadiens decided not to draft Quinn Hughes because they already had Victor Mete, who was a smallish defenseman, right? We don't need another small defenseman, so we won't draft Quinn Hughes. We'll draft somebody else because we've already got Victor Mete. Things can change, right? Kirby Dach could have a breakout season next year. There's all kinds of different things that could happen. So there's no rush to this rebuild, and there's no rush to have a second line center. There's no rush to we often hear people talk about making a splash. Well, they're not needed. They don't need to make a splash. They need to make moves that will help the team and help the organization. Outdoor guys, to be honest, I'm not a Habs fan, but I don't hate them. But I have to say it's extremely impressive to see how good their future is going to be. It's crazy how many good under 25-year-olds they have. This rebuild, if you would call it that, has been extremely impressive so far. I think so too. And I mean, obviously I'm biased. I'm a Canadiens fan, but I think that the rebuild has been, to this point, executed, nearly perfectly. But a rebuild means nothing if you don't get to where your ultimate goal is, right? If you don't reach your ultimate goal, the first 3 years of a rebuild don't mean anything if the next 3 years, you sort of abandon the principles that got you to where you were. And, we've seen this multiple times, the Buffalo Sabres, the Detroit Red Wings, the Toronto Maple Leafs, teams who were rebuilding and decided that their rebuild was over long before it really was, and started doing things that have now, forced their team into lengthy periods of mediocrity, right? Just because you make the playoffs doesn't mean that your rebuild is over and that you can all of a sudden abandon your preference or your focus on, internal development, on bringing in young assets, developing prospects, all of that stuff. Your minor league teams. These are things that you need to always, just because you get a couple of good players in the draft and sneak your way into the playoffs doesn't mean all of a sudden now you're ready for the big time, because you're not. And if the Canadiens sort of take that approach, and I know a lot of fans think they should, and a lot of people have told me that they believe that the rebuild is over, to me that's even worse than not rebuilding at all, right? If you've gone through all of this pain for 3 years, and all of a sudden now you believe the rebuild's over and you're going to go out and do all that, think that you're ready to win the Stanley Cup. Then now all of a sudden you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, you're the Buffalo Sabres, you're these teams that are perennially good, but not really that good. Leafs did the same thing after they rebuilt. They signed Tavares and were a perennial contender. Well, the Leafs have never been a perennial contender, Gandalf. Name me the year when the Leafs were a perennial Stanley Cup contender. They've never been, right? The problem with the Leafs is they drafted really well and they got, 3 superstars, and all of a sudden they felt like that meant that their rebuild was over, and they started going out and signing, 35, 36, 37, 40-year-olds, and they abandoned their rebuild before it was over. And, if their rebuild was ultimately to win one Stanley Cup, they certainly ended their rebuild too soon. And if their rebuild was to become, a perennial, contending team, then they failed in that as well. Like the Leafs have never been a perennial contender, right? And they had every opportunity to be that. They drafted extremely well. They had Marner, Nylander, and Matthews. And they had an incredible core to build around, and they didn't. They failed. And the window for the Leafs to win was when those players were on their first contracts, right? Either their ELC or their first contract coming out of ELC. And they didn't do that. They didn't surround them with the right people. And, they thought they were ready for prime time long before they were. And it failed miserably. And, same thing, Detroit, right? We saw Detroit a couple years ago. They came close to the playoffs. They snuck in the playoffs. And then all of a sudden they're out signing guys like Patrick Kane and Tarasenko and Andrew Kopp and all these like mid-30-year-olds. And they weren't ready for that. They're still in rebuilding mode. And the Canadiens, thankfully, are in that same situation. But thankfully their management is much more responsible than that and much more patient and willing to stick to their plan. I love Marner. Glad he got out of there. Hopefully he can find his playoff stride in Vegas. Yeah, Marner's a great hockey player, right? So is Nylander. So is Matthews. But the roster that was built around those guys was terrible because the management really had no idea what they were doing, led by Brendan Shanahan. And Brendan Shanahan was the big problem there. And, now that he's gone, one hopes that they can turn that around a little bit. The Canadiens don't need a second line center for next year. They don't need it, right? So going out and throwing away a bunch of assets for a second line center just doesn't make sense right now. If they can get one at a good price and they get one that, makes sense and fits the plan, then yeah, absolutely do it. But to, go out and give up, 2 or 3 prospects or a couple of, first round draft picks plus prospects, Mason McTavish is not Mason McTavish. Is it, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Anaheim. Is it Mason McTavish? Yeah, Mason McTavish, right? I always get him mixed up with the guy for Dallas that just got... Anyways, Mason McTavish. That's a whole roster that probably has more talent than all of the have combined. I don't know what that means, user 93. I'm hearing the Leafs might trade for Kadri. I would doubt that, Louis, but I don't know. Outdoor guys, the Red Wings are still doing that. They sign JVR and Mason Appleton and so on, or almost make the playoffs, then go and sign some veterans when it won't work. Yeah, again, the Red Wings have moved on to the next stage of their rebuild, or they've abandoned their rebuild and believe that the rebuild's over when it's not, right? It's not. And the Canadiens are not there either. So if the Canadiens decided now that the rebuild was over and that they were going to go out and sign a bunch of veterans to try and, bring this team that's, was able to make the playoffs last year over the top, it would be a miserable failure. It would be a miserable failure. You got to continue to let these guys cook, continue to let them get better. Let Lane Hudson get better. Let Caden Gooley get better. Let Arbor Jacki get better. Let Slavkovsky get better. Let Suzuki, Caulfield, all these guys, right? It's not just because you made the playoffs doesn't mean, unless that's your goal. If your team's goal is to make the playoffs, then great. But I don't know that the Canadiens' goal is to simply make the playoffs. So, all that said, the needs, so-called needs that the Canadiens had going into this season, if you're to believe the media, particularly the francophone media in Montreal, the BPM Sports, the RDS, the TVA, was a second-line center and a right-handed defenseman. Again, as I've said, I don't believe those things were needs. Obviously, they're areas of weakness, and if you can, strengthen those areas of weaknesses by, using your areas of strength, then that's great. And I think that's what happened with the Dobson trade, right? The Canadiens recognized that there was a guy out there, who was an RFA. He didn't seem to be that keen at sticking in New York. He expressed an interest at some point of being, a Montreal Canadien. And, there was a deal to be made, and the Canadiens had, an excess of draft picks, one of which they were able to get from the Calgary Flames through the Monahan deal for taking Monahan's salary off the Calgary Flames. They were able to trade Emil Heineman, who they got from Calgary in the Tyler Toffoli trade. And so they had, an excess of draft picks. And they, draft picks that they didn't really see as having a ton of value for them. And they had a player in Emil Heineman who they believed they could, replace relatively easily. So, that was an opportunity there, and Dobson being willing to take a little bit less to come to Montreal, all of the planets, sort of aligned there, right? You had a guy who fit the profile, right? He's 25 years old. He can grow with the organization. And he can, be a part of this team going forward. He's signed for 8 years, right? So he's not a 35-year-old stopgap guy who's here for a year or two. He's not, he's 25. He's basically the same age as, he's a little bit younger than Nick Suzuki, but he's right around the same age with Caulfield and all the other guys. So, a trade of opportunity, right? So. Kent Hughes has his ear to the ground. He's out there listening to everything that's going on. He's inquiring, and this trade came across, and the possibility was there, and he was able to make a deal, and he was didn't give up anything. He wasn't giving up Reinbacher. Doesn't appear that he was giving up Mailloux, and he was able to make this trade without giving up a whole lot, and as a trade of opportunity, an opportunity to make the team better, to strengthen a weakness without, weakening yourself anywhere else, it was a no-brainer. So those are the kinds of trades that I think you're going to see from Kent Hughes. He's not going out there desperately looking for, this, that, or the other thing. He's, out there looking for, trades that will make the Canadiens better. So Montreal needs to be aggressive now before they have to pay Lane Hudson $10+ million. Again, you're completely wrong on that, Gandalf. Completely wrong. First of all, they don't have to pay him $10+ million. They may or they may not. They don't have to. And second of all, if they pay him $10 million for the next 8 years, they've got him locked in for 8 years at $10 million. So again, not a big deal. Then your window starts to run, right? Your window starts to run. Technically, you could argue your window started to run when Nick Suzuki signed his contract. In which case, the Canadiens then, the clock is running on this group, right? But again, if you don't abandon the principles of the rebuild and you keep those principles going, i.e. you're building from within, you're focusing on internal development, you're focusing on scouting, drafting, player development, and whatever, then, when Hudson, when the 8 years of Hudson's contract comes up or Suzuki's contract comes up, then you've got another crop of young kids coming along, and you can make a reasonable, rational decision about whether to, sign Suzuki to another contract, right? Is he older? How much is he worth? Is he worth, can you afford him? or whatever. But that's the whole point of this, is the Canadiens are not going for a one window. Their goal is not one window to win one Stanley Cup. If you listen to Ken Hughes, he says it over and over and over and over again. The goal is to become perennial Stanley Cup contenders, and to have a team that can sustainably move into the future and be a contender to win the Stanley Cup year after year after year. So, getting desperate or getting aggressive, as Gandalf says, in the short term because of this, that, or the other thing, that doesn't work. And that's why so many teams in the NHL fail, is because they get desperate and they go out there and they start, making moves and trades that, we need this to happen now. We need this to happen now. It's not, you can't force things like that. So I disagree completely with the idea that the Canadiens have to be aggressive now. They absolutely don't need to be aggressive now, right? They need to sign Lane Hudson. They need to get him under contract, just like they need to get, they're going to need to get Demidov under contract, and they're going to look at possibly extending Patrick Laine. So again, getting back to the Dobson trade, so there's Mr. Dobson. So the Canadiens used an excess or a surplus of assets in order to fill a quote-unquote hole in their lineup. They wouldn't have done it if it would have cost any more. In fact, the word is that the Islanders wanted more, and the Canadiens weren't prepared to do. Certainly, Reinbacher was not going to be in the mix. So they were able to give away something that they had in surplus and bring in what appears to be a very high quality right-handed defenseman, a first pairing type defenseman. And, by the way, they've also locked him up for 8 years, 25 years old. So he's basically, locked up until he's, in his early 30s. And, if you're able to also get Lane Hudson to sign on the dotted line for another 8 years, then, you've got a pretty solid group. You've got Gouli for another 5 years. You've got you've got Jackeye, you've got Struble. You've got some leeway there to use those guys as assets. You've got Alex Carrier. I don't know how long his contract is, but you've got a pretty solid core of defensemen, and then you add guys like Reinbacher and Engstrom in the mix. And you've done a pretty good job of solidifying your core going forward. And then you've got you still have young guys coming in behind them, right? So as guys like Matheson get older, or Carrier gets older, you can start looking at replacing them with guys like Bogdan Konyushkov and other young guys who are coming up up the pike. So. I don't agree that the Canadiens are desperate to do anything right now. In fact, I believe the complete opposite. Dobson fits the Canadiens' plan. He's a highly talented right-handed defenseman with size. He's a proven first-pairing defenseman. Obviously, there are no guarantees in hockey or anywhere in the world. But certainly, Noah Dobson is a pretty solid bet. The return for Dobson was pretty palatable. 2 first-round draft picks in a mediocre draft. Obviously, those draft picks actually turned out to be pretty good for the Islanders. They got a pretty good return with Keishon Aitchison and Victor Eklund. I think, I don't think anybody would have expected those 2 guys to be available at 16 and 17, but nonetheless, they were draft picks that the Canadiens were willing to give up. One of which, as I said, was acquired through a trade. And Emil Heineman, despite having a pretty solid first half of the season last year, isn't a huge loss. Obviously he's a loss, and he'll be missed. And at times he was very good for the Canadiens last year, and I'm sure he's a guy that the guys in the room liked and got along with, and was a good enough kid. But at the end of the day, he's not that hard to replace, especially when you look at the players who are coming up from the minors. When you're looking at guys like Beck and Roy and Jackeye and Tuck and Tyler Thorpe and all the the Canadiens are in pretty good shape for bottom six forwards, throughout the organization, right? And so there's a bunch of guys who are going to be coming up over the next few years who will certainly be able to fill any hole left by Emil Heineman, I think. So again, 8-year contract, $9.5 million AEV. So I mean, unless Dobson completely flops and completely, the player that we've seen him to be so far in his career completely disappears, that $9.5 million AEV over the next 8 years is going to be not that hard to handle, right? It's, the cap is going up. So, you've got a first pairing defenseman for the next 8 years at probably what's going to be, by the end of the contract, substantially less than 10% of the cap. Like right now, he's right around 10% of the cap. And, within the next 5 years, it'll probably be closer to 7% of the cap. So not a big deal. So I think this trade was a typical Kent Hughes, right? Not one where he was going out, in any type of desperation to make a move. A trade of opportunity, took advantage of a situation, and used the team's strength to remedy one of its weaknesses. Really good move. Couldn't be happier. I think that, again, there's no guarantees about any players. Any player can sort of take a step backwards, but this trade looks pretty good for the Montreal Canadiens. And that, even if Emil Heineman goes on to be a 25-goal scorer for the Islanders or becomes, a Selke Award nominee, it doesn't matter, right? The Canadiens didn't, they used a surplus to take care of a need. Mark Boisclair, Kent Hughes is unreal. I'm biased. I think we're all biased to a degree, but I don't disagree. I mean, Kent Hughes has brought a different attitude, a different approach to the general manager position, a different approach than we've ever seen with Montreal, right? Like complete opposite of Bergevin, abandoning a lot of the traditional ideas that we thought, went with, roster building and managing an NHL hockey team. He's he doesn't do all that stuff. When we see all of the GMs, flailing all over the place to, who can spend the most money on free agent day, Kent Hughes is kind of patiently sitting by and just making these little moves that sort of, progressively make the team better, right? Progressively, the team gets better. Like, they're incremental changes. He's not looking to go and blow up, which you can see the division that's coming with the fans and the media because they want that. They want that, right? The Canadian, obviously Canadiens fans will tell you that they want to win the Stanley Cup, and I think they do. But the Canadiens want to be also, they want to pick up their paper on Saturday morning and see that the Canadiens traded for the best player in the league, right? They want the Canadiens to make that splash. They want the Canadiens to go out and get, Taves or Crosby or these guys. And honestly, that's not a recipe for success, right? Noah Dobson and Zachary Bolduc and Alex Carrier. Those are the recipes to success. Those are the trades that bring you success, not the big splashes where, you go out there and you're like, oh, we're going to bring in the biggest name we could, that's not Kent Hughes, and that's not a recipe for success. Bergevin never had a plan, right? Like one year there, it's just, there's no plan in place. And this year, Kent Hughes is, changing that attitude completely. L33, best group I've seen in the last 10 years, working around them directly. You're working around them directly, L33, is that what you're saying? Yeah, that would be cool. All right, talk to me, DSOT. As a Leaf fan myself, what can we expect this year from Michael Pezzetta? Michael Pezzetta, you can expect a kid who's going to work his tail off every minute of practice, every minute he's on the ice. High energy guy, tough, not the best fighter in the league, but's not afraid to fight anybody. Not the most skilled or talented guy in the world. Got probably a bit of a raw deal last year by spending so much time in the press box that by the time, he needed to be put into the lineup, he was sort of, he was pretty stale, and, would have been hard for him after, being sidelined for so long to really contribute. I think more than anything, if I can say anything, is you've got a guy who's going to work his ass off. He's never, he may not be the most talented kid in the world. He might not be the most skilled kid in the world, but you're never gonna be left thinking that he didn't really put his best effort in. So, I'm not sure where he would fit into the Leafs' grand scheme of things. I don't have a great grasp of their roster from top to bottom. I wouldn't expect him to be any higher than a fourth line guy, but you could do worse than having him as a fourth line winger, I think, is what I'll say. I came in 2016, seen the group since Subban Price days. I just didn't know what you meant by working around them directly. What way are you working around them directly? Do you work with the team? Let's get some questions over here on YT, guys. Let's thank you for the thumbs up, guys. Keep those coming. Hit the subscribe button down below. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the notification bell. Let's get in here with some questions, guys, and get some conversation going. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Bolduc trade, right? Again, a trade of opportunity. We heard for weeks and weeks and weeks that the Canadiens were trying to get Jordan Kyrou, right? That's what the media was telling us, and that's what all the insiders were telling us. And, everyone was like, oh, the Canadiens are trying to get Jordan Kyrou. The Canadiens are trying to get Jordan Kyrou. Well, this, again, is a typical, Kent Hughes deal. He's always on the lookout for players that will help the team, right? Arguably, Zachary Bolduc does not fit the profile of a player that he's not a centerman. He's capable of playing center, as I understand, but he's a winger. He's not a veteran. He's not particularly big, but he's definitely a player that will help the Montreal Canadiens. And so when the opportunity, whether it was in the course of discussing a trade for Kyrou or otherwise, when the possibility of getting Zachary Bolduc came around, then Kent Hughes' ears perked up, and he would have gotten involved, right? So Bolduc fits the plan in the sense that he's young, he's 21 or 22 years old, so he can quote unquote grow with the team. He can join the team and become a part of it. He is a hard worker, good work ethic, good skill, right? We saw last year, certainly at least in the second half of the season, he was a fairly prolific goal scorer, played on the power play for the Blues, led the NHL in rookie scoring in the last 25 games or so, I think, of the season. So, a ton of talent, young. What I really like about him is he, in addition to the work ethic, he has a certain level of what I like to call self-awareness. He understands his strengths, he understands his weaknesses, and he understands what he needs to do in order to be a contributor to an NHL hockey team, right? He came with the Blues last year, and one of the issues was physicality. He wasn't physical enough. And so he understood that in order to be an effective NHLer and to help his St. Louis, the St. Louis Blues, he had to be more physical, and he was able to go out and do that, right? And I think, to me, self-awareness is one of the greatest qualities a hockey player can have, especially a young hockey player, right? One who understands what they need to do in order to improve, one, and two, to help their team win, right? So, we saw glimpses of self-awareness from Slavkovsky last year, where he talked about, having to be more physical and playing more like, he said he had to play more like Brady Tkachuk. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done, but I think that self-awareness in a guy like Zachary Bolduc, certainly is one of his great assets. He's appears to be a pretty easy to get along with guy. I think he'll fit in with the group pretty, without any real problem. Obviously the Canadiens are pretty, well focused on bringing in kids with character, who will get along with the rest of the team and fit in with the group. And I don't think that'll be a problem. And of course, the added bonus of him being a Québécois, right? Bringing in a Québécois certainly, is always beneficial in Montreal. Is there added pressure there for a francophone or a Québécois kid playing in Montreal? Perhaps. But when you get a kid who can, match that pressure or thrive under that pressure, then, it certainly is pretty special. So, Mark Elliott, Kyrou isn't a center either. Bolduc brings tenacity and some grit. While I've always found Kyrou to be shy of traffic and corners. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Obviously, Kyrou isn't a center. Probably even less so of a center than Bolduc. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that Kyrou is shy of the corners and traffic, but he certainly is not a physical player. He certainly is less physical than Bolduc, but no less physical than Bolduc was at the beginning of last year. Bolduc, what I really like about Bolduc is that he's recognized that physicality is a necessary component of his game in order for him to succeed. He certainly wasn't that player in the Quebec League when he was with the Quebec Remparts. And again, my understanding is that the deal with Kyrou didn't fall through because the Canadiens wanted Bolduc more. My understanding is that the deal with Kyrou just didn't work out. And whether it was through those discussions that the Canadiens also found out that Bolduc was available, or what have you, I don't know. But my sense is that the ask for Kyrou was just too high for Montreal, and the Canadiens weren't prepared to give that return, right? Whether it involved Reinbacher or whatever. So again, the return for Bolduc being Logan Mailloux, pardon me. I'm not happy to lose Mailloux. I have more faith in Mailloux than probably most Canadiens fans. I really like the kid, a good player. I think he has a good NHL career in front of him. I think he's a good kid. If you hear him interviewed, he's a really good kid, right? With the issues that he went through, prior to being drafted, the way he's handled that since, again, there's no excuse for what he did, and I would never excuse it, and I don't think he would want anybody to excuse it. In fact, if you saw him interviewed the other day when he arrived in St. Louis, he was asked about it. And I think one of the questions he was asked was whether or not he's moved on from it. And his answer was no, I'm not moved on from it. It's a part of my life, and it's something that I have to live with, and it's something that, I deal with every single day, and, something that I have to work to be better about. It's not something that, it happened 5 years ago, I've made my amends, and now I'm moving on with my life. He's worked with kids, and in Montreal, and he'll do the same when he does. So I really like the way that he's never really backed away from or shied away from answering for his, I don't want to call it crimes, but answering for his transgressions and whatever. I think he's a really good kid. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we didn't give up anything, or the Canadiens didn't give up anything to get Bolduc. They certainly did. I think that there's a really good possibility that Logan Mailloux becomes a high-quality defenseman in the NHL. I know there's a lot of Canadiens fans who don't believe that. I know there's a lot of Canadiens fans who are down on him. I know there's a lot of Canadiens fans who look at some of his play and they don't like the player. I'm a little bit more patient than that typically. I think he's young. I think he has a lot to work on. I think that he has worked on it. I think that he has gotten better. And I think he's got a lot of tools to be a really good hockey player. And defensemen sometimes take a while to get to that level. And Mailloux, I think, will get there. So I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think that it's a matter of the Canadiens giving up somebody who, was no good, and they stole Bolduc or whatever. I think that even if Mailloux goes on to have a great career, and Bolduc does as well, then I think everything's fine. I hope I hope Mailloux does well. I'd love to see him have a good career in St. Louis or wherever else he might end up, and I think he's certainly capable of it. So. Do I see any center we can get short term if Doc doesn't pan out? Pickings seem rather slim. I don't think, again, if you were here on the show earlier, Mark, I don't think there's any need for them to, the Canadiens don't need a second line center. They certainly don't need one in the short term. I mean, I don't know what you mean by if Doc doesn't pan out. I mean, if Doc plays even the way he did last year, that team was good enough to make the playoffs, right? They made the playoffs last year with Kirby Dach as their second line center for the majority of the year. That's a fact. So if Dach is, even remotely better than he was last year, then that will be an improvement, right? Adding Demidov to that line, will be an improvement. So again, I don't think that they need to go out and get a short-term second line center to carry them through until Michael Hage is ready to come, because there's no guarantee Michael Hage is coming. So I think at this stage, I think they build internally. They fill that spot internally if they can, whether it's Dach or Newhook this year or some variation. Have you heard Kent Hughes talk the other day? They talked about scenarios where centermen centermen are defined essentially nowadays by the person who takes the face off. Once the puck's dropped, the players are not really, the positions are not sort of the way they were historically. First man in, second man, like that kind of thing, and so there's all kinds of different solutions that could come out of that. Short of going out and bringing in a Claude Giroux or some 36-year-old guy who's going to be here for a year or two. I don't see them needing, quote unquote, a second line center right now. What's up, Dax Rush? Bonjour, comment ça va? I am the chef of the arena. Feed them in the... Oh, that's awesome, L33. At the Bell Center? That sounds like a cool job. That would be really fun. What do I think of the Marner deal? I mean, Vegas is going to be Vegas, and Marner is going to be Marner. Right? Vegas is the team that, Vegas is the team that's going to go out and get the big name, pay the big money. Sports Guy is hoping that Bolduc isn't a Drouin 2.0. I think that's a little bit unfair to both guys. Obviously, Drouin didn't work out in Montreal. I think there's a lot more at play there that probably I wouldn't talk so flippantly about, whether it's his mental health issues and things that he was dealing with here. I like Jonathan Drouin as a hockey player. Unfortunately, he has not really lived up to his potential in the NHL so far. I watched him play junior hockey in Halifax. I know how talented he is. I think that skill-wise, he's, capable of being an elite hockey player in the NHL. But unfortunately, I think there's other things, going on in his life, and sometimes he struggles to deal with things. I think it's probably a mistake on his part to leave Colorado and go to New York to play for the Islanders. I think that he had a pretty good situation in Denver, playing with his former teammate in Halifax, Nathan McKinnon. I think he probably should have stayed there. But again, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, so it's not really fair for me to say. What's up, Hexy? What's up, Busy? Cool Canada, what's up? Keep the questions coming, guys. I love it. So just for final notes on the Bolduc trade, assuming that last year wasn't a complete fluke for Bolduc, which there's no reason to believe it was. He's a first-round draft pick. He's a 50-goal scorer in junior. All indications are that he's a good quality hockey player, and that last year, was not, a flash in the pan or a one-time thing. So assuming that, that progression continues, you're looking at a guy who is probably capable of playing, a second-line role in the NHL. But, if you're a Stanley Cup contender, if he's a third liner on your team you got a pretty darn good team, right? So if you've got, Zachary Bolduc playing on your third line as a winger, then your team is pretty good, and you're likely in the mix for big things, whether it's a Stanley Cup or, a pretty serious playoff run. So, in the short term, I think he's a guy who, could probably help the Canadiens out on their second line if they need that. He's a guy who can play on the power play. So again, the Canadiens have a goal of having two pretty serious, hard to play against power plays. So next year you're going to have, your first power play line. You could have, Hudson, Demidov, Suzuki, Caulfield, Slavkovsky, did I say? And then, your second power play could be, Dobson, Bolduc, Newhook, Doc. So, there's a pretty scary group. What's up, Billy D? Welcome, man. Long time no see. So, there's a guy who can bolster your second, your second power play, and trades like that can ripple through your lineup as well, right? We saw that with the Carrier trade, right? Carrier brought something in and of himself when he came to the Canadiens last year, but what he also did was he sent ripples through the rest of the lineup where he allowed other players to fit more appropriately into, to use Marty St. Louis terms, fit in the right chair. Right, so as a right-handed defenseman, he allowed Goulet to switch back over to the left side where he was a better player, where he was more comfortable, and he played better there. It rippled all the way down the lineup. With a guy like Bolduc entering the lineup, him playing on the second power play, with Dobson coming in the lineup, him playing on the second power play. Well, guess what? Mike Matheson doesn't have to play 26 minutes a game anymore. Mike Matheson can go down to being an 18, 19, 20-minute defenseman. I think we might see him focus on a more defensive role. He doesn't have to worry about being as offensive as he was before, which I think is what led to a lot of his turnovers and his the mistakes that everybody seems to focus so heavily on. But I think we saw last year that when Matheson goes into a game with a clear focus on defending and sort of putting the offensive side of his game aside in favor of defense, he's a pretty capable guy. We saw him shut down Nathan McKinnon. We saw him shut down like all kinds of the top players in the league last year. There was a streak there of 5 or 6 games where Jack Eichel, he shut down all these guys. Barkov, he was pretty effective. So having Bolduc and Dobson in the lineup allows Matheson to take on a lesser role and a more focused role where he doesn't have to be playing 3 or 4 different roles. He doesn't have to be on the penalty. He doesn't have to be on the power play, the penalty kill, play as an offensive defenseman, play as he doesn't have to do all that stuff, and he doesn't have to play for 26 minutes. So I think second pairing Mike Matheson playing 18 minutes, 19 minutes a game where he's killing penalties, not on the power play, and is able to focus more on the defensive side of the game, improves him as a player significantly. So, like I said, these trades, not only, when I talk about the trades making the team better, it's not just about, the production and the play of the specific players, but they can have effect down the track as well. So Billy D, Mark is here, Dax Rush, welcome guys, bienvenue tout le monde. Like I said, if you have questions, we're going to move on to the draft here now and talk about the draft and maybe talk a little bit about the players that the Canadiens drafted and see what you guys have to say about them. We're going to go through all of the players that they drafted, if that's all right with you. Of course, the first thing we need to talk about, if we're going to talk about the draft, is, of course, the Dobson trade, and we've already done that, so I'm not going to go through that at any great length. Again, obviously, because of the trade, the Canadiens had no picks in the first round. Dax Rush. Tu veux une réponse en français ou en anglais, Dax? Dax, before we get into the draft, we're going to talk about LJ Mooney a little bit later, but we might as well talk about him now. I like LJ Mooney. Obviously, I mean, he's a Canadian now, so obviously I'm going to have, you know, better, better thoughts about him as a player. Because he's a Canadian, I'm going to have a bias in his favor now. But I like the player. I mean, realistically, if he was 6'2", he would have been drafted in the first round. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think there's any dispute about that. I don't think anybody would argue with you about that. He's a boom bust kind of kid, right? Anytime you're dealing with a kid that small, you've got to decide whether or not, okay, c'est parfait, Dax. Anytime you've got a kid like that, you've got to decide at what point of the draft are you willing to take a chance on a kid who's 5'7", 5'8", depending on who you ask. Ton of talent, physical for his size. He's not afraid. Dynamic skating, puck handling. He's a good playmaker. Has a good shot. High hockey IQ. All kinds of great positives, right? But at 5'7", you have to wonder whether or not he can translate that play to the NHL. If he can, the Canadiens hit the jackpot, right? If he's the next, Martin St. Louis, then yeah, awesome. If he's the next Mats Naslund, if he's the next Cole Caulfield, yeah, awesome. If he's the next, God forbid, he doesn't have the same personality, but hockey skill as Theo Fleury, then yeah, it's awesome, right? But sometimes 5'7" has a hard time, in the NHL. Whether it's staying healthy, whether it's the physicality of the game, who knows? So he's a great player. He's got a ton of talent, but it remains to be seen whether or not he can translate that talent and what he's done so far in his career to the next level. Yeah, he looked great at development camp. Arguably the best player out there. He looked great. And again, anytime you're looking at a prospect, it's all about the next level, right? They dominate at one level, and then the question becomes, can they do that again at the next level? So for LJ Mooney, he's going to play college hockey next year. He's going to the University of Minnesota. Can he do that in the NCAA, right? Can he do what he did at the USNDDP program? Can he do that at the next level? Can he do that against bigger guys, older guys, more physical guys? Can he do that at the NCAA level? If he can, then the question becomes, well, can he do that as a pro? Can he do that in the American Hockey League? And then if he can do that at the American Hockey League, then it becomes, can he do that at, the NHL level? So, it's all about progression, right? So Demidov, I'll use Demidov as an example, right? Demidov, we know what he was able to do in Russian junior hockey, right? Before the Canadiens drafted him, he was, breaking records in the MHL. But there was no guarantee that he was going to be able to translate that to the next level. Well, this year we saw him after the Canadiens drafted him. He played, in the KHL with SKA, and he was able to dominate at that level, despite all of the, the concerns and the questions about his ice time and the way he was being used by his team. He certainly, by any measure, dominated the KHL. So clearly he was able to take that to the next level. Well, now he's, played 2 games, in the regular season and 5 in the playoffs in the NHL. And so now we wonder, is it, is he going to translate it to and to what degree is he going to translate it to the next level? So, it's the same with any prospect. LJ Mooney will be the same. I don't think that LJ Mooney is going to fail because he doesn't try hard enough, doesn't work hard enough, or isn't skilled enough. The only question for LJ Mooney is going to be, whether his size precludes him from translating his game to the next level. He scored a Kucherov goal, no shot goal. Yeah. He was spectacular, not just in the game today, but also in the drills at practice yesterday. Great hockey player, but he's a boomer bust. If he, like I said, if he can become a Mats Naslund or a Cole Caulfield or a Lane Hudson, yeah, awesome. But if he doesn't, he doesn't. And picking him, where the Canadiens did at 113th is not a huge risk for Montreal. So I think it was a good risk for them to take. Let's go back over here. We got some questions over on TikTok. Is Line A still around? Yes, he is. Dobson was a great get. You guys now have 2 elite offensive defensemen. I don't disagree with that. I think that those are 2 elite offensive defensemen who also are much better defensively than people give them credit for. Slowly but surely, they will get better. Who are we talking about, Joe Bomboncito? I'm not sure who you're talking about, Joe. Sorry. Dobson could get around 55 or 60 points. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he had 70 2 years ago, and he had 39, I think, this year. He's still young, so we'll see how things go. I don't think, we'll see. We'll see. Bolduc around 40 points, 20 goals, possibly. Don't know. As a Canadiens fan, do you feel Pizzetta going to Leafs as a betrayal? No, I don't think it's a betrayal. The Canadiens weren't going to re-sign him. I think he can go play anywhere he wants. He's from Toronto. It's his hometown. Do you see it as a betrayal, Michael? I don't see how you could have any. First of all, I don't see how you could have any issue with Michael Pizzetta for what he brought to the Montreal Canadiens over the last several years. Answering the bell whenever he was asked to. Sitting on the bench, sitting in the press box, not complaining. He did everything, the Canadiens could possibly have asked of him, and a whole lot more. So, I don't have any issue with Michael Pizzetta in any way, let alone the fact that he went over to play for Toronto. Yeah, well, again, Michael, if there's Habs fans that are saying it's a betrayal, I don't think they really understand hockey too much. I don't think they understand, anytime you're dealing with, sports fans, 60 to 70% of them are not overly informed or, particularly rational about their fandom. I think that if anybody is upset with Michael Pizzetta or has anything negative to say about Michael Pizzetta, about him going to Toronto or anything else, I just don't think that they understand the Montreal Canadiens or Michael Pizzetta or, what Michael Pizzetta did for the Montreal Canadiens. I think what do you want the kid to do? Yeah, same with Pacioretty. Who cares? Let's talk about the draft, guys. So as I said, because of the standby, just trying to bring up some stuff here. Because of the Dobson trade, the Canadiens had no picks in the first round. They also traded away their 41st and their 49th pick. So their 2 second-round draft picks, they traded away in return for pick number 34. So they moved up to get Alexander Zhuravsky. So the first pick for the Canadiens in the draft was Alexander Zhuravsky. Alexander Zhuravsky is a left-handed winger from Ufa. He's in the Ufa junior program. He played most of his season last year for Tolpar Ufa in the MHL. He finished with 50 points in 45 games. He is a really good playmaker with great hands and skill. He has a high hockey IQ. He sees the game quite well. He has a really good vision. Very talented, dynamic type player with the puck. If you've gone and looked at any of his highlights on YouTube, you've seen some of the moves that he's capable of making. His skating needs work. He's not the best or fastest skater in the world. But they said the same thing about Ivan Demidov last year. His edge work is pretty decent, but his speed at this stage is not the best. But he'll work on that. On his talent alone, he's one of the better players in this draft. He's a guy who, certainly as far as ceiling is concerned, projects to be a top 6 player. And to be honest with you, that was a pretty rare thing in this draft. Even at 16 and 17, the prospect of getting a player who had really much of a chance of ever being a top 6 player was pretty slim. As it turned out, Victor Eklund was available, and that might have been a guy who would do the same. But yeah, he's if he can improve his skating and he can continue to develop and continue to get better, he will he will certainly have a chance of playing in the NHL, and certainly could be a top 6 type player. Grew up playing with Ivan Demidov. Came up through the same system as Demidov. They've known each other. They're friends, I guess. So I guess there's a benefit there. Maybe they got a little bit of an inside scoop on the kid from Demidov. But yeah, that's Jurovsky. Tallish, 6'1", with not a lot of weight. So there's a big frame, but needs to add some pounds. He's 6'1", 163. He's left-handed. Elite Prospects had him ranked at 42, and Hockey Prospects had him ranked at 24. The Canadiens obviously thought highly of him. They thought highly enough of him to move up from 41 to 34 to get him. The Canadiens obviously have decent connections in Russia, so Bobrovsky and other Canadiens personnel would have had the opportunity to speak with him. I think Bobrov has said that he was able to speak to him, Jurovsky, when the Canadiens were in St. Petersburg to watch Ivan Demidov play. I believe it was in February or maybe January. So they know the kid. The Canadiens usually do a pretty good job of scouting these guys, and when the Canadiens are willing to move up to get a kid like this, it's usually because they have some pretty good information on him. So I'm optimistic about this kid and what he's capable of. He's obviously a few years away. I'm not exactly sure how many years he has left in his contract to UFA, but we'll see. We'll see how long it takes for him to get over to North America. But again, a kid who, I think, again, another bit of a boom or bust guy, not unlike LJ Mooney, different in some ways, but similar in that, his ceiling is really, really high, but he also might not turn out at all. So should be good. What's up, Tristan? Good to see you. Welcome back. Mark Elliott, they offered him a contract. We didn't. There's no betrayal. I wish him the best, except, of course, against us. Yeah, Michael Bozzetta. It's a business, man. He's trying to make a living just like anybody else. So I have no ill feelings towards the kid, and I think, frankly, if anybody does, I think they're pretty. It's a pretty petty thing. We lost Armia and Dvorak, replaced by Bolduc. Yeah, I guess that's one way of looking at it. I don't know if I would agree with it. It's not quite as simple as that. Long time no see. I don't know who you are. The only plus I see is Dobson. I see Demidov with around 20 goals. Again, based on what, Joe? Based on what? What is it that makes you think that Demidov, will get 20 goals? He may get less than that. He get more than that. I don't think either of us have a crystal ball, and I don't think it makes any sense for any of us to start trying to predict how many points certain guys will get. As far as the Canadiens losing Armia and Dvorak and replacing them with Bolduc, I think what you're forgetting is that there's room for internal development. There's room for players to get better within the organization. Right? You don't have to. The only way for a hockey team to improve is not by going out and trading for players or signing free agents. Right? You in order for a team to get better, in order for a team to be a contender, the players within your organization also have to improve, right? Players have to come up from the minors. Players who are on your NHL team have to be better than they were the year before, right? So again, if you're simplifying the Canadiens' improvement to, well, they lost 2 players and brought in 1, then I don't think you're fully grasping the concept of how sports, certainly pro sports, work, right? Like if if everybody on the Montreal Canadiens roster plays exactly the same as they did last year, the team's probably not going to improve that much. But if, everybody steps it up a little bit and, a couple of the prospects make the move up to the NHL from the American Hockey League, if, that's, internal development is just as, if not more important than going out and signing players and trading for players. As a Panthers fan, I was relieved to see Habs eliminated because I think Habs are the biggest threat. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think the Canadiens had a good team, and I think that if they had gotten on a roll in the playoffs, they probably would have been a little bit scary last year. But at the end of the day, they were pretty inexperienced, and for them to have, done, anything more than, I don't think the chances of them winning one series or even beyond that, would have been a very high chance. They're young, and for a young team like that, an inexperienced team like that, an immature team like that, to do any real damage in the playoffs probably would have been a long shot. Again, with a young team like that too, if they can get on a roll and get some momentum going, that can be a bit of a scary thing. But again, I didn't really see too much risk of the Canadiens being a threat to. They certainly did a number on the Panthers in the regular season, but as far as playoff hockey goes, it's a very different animal. Yeah, IMG PED. I think the Canadiens, as the years go by, I think the Canadiens will become more of a threat to the teams in their conference as they get more experience and become more of a mature hockey team. I think they'll be better. But again, the development doesn't just come by going out and signing guys. It comes from inside, it comes from within the organization, and that's the whole idea behind a rebuild, is that you're not out there trying to sign and trade for your whole team. You're building. You're focusing on development. You're focusing on your minor league teams. You're focusing on your scouting and your drafting. You're focusing on player. Like if you saw the development camp today, right? The Canadiens just did a 3-day development camp with basically all of their I don't want to call them their lower end prospects, but like their non-pro guys. So let's call it guys who were drafted in the last 2 years. They had a scout. They had a coaching staff of like 12 coaches at the development camp, right? They had coaches from within the organization, but they also brought in coaches from outside the organization. They brought coaches in from, junior hockey, from the NCAA. They brought in coaches, from all over the place. One, as a development tool for the coaches, because it's a good experience for them. But also because there is a heavy focus on, the development within the organization. They want these players to develop and eventually work their way to the NHL. They're a long way off, but the Canadiens are dedicating the resources to developing these guys. Even if you see in the off season, we saw Demidov on the ice a few times. We saw Hudson on the ice a few times. We saw different guys. When they're on the ice, there's always Paul Byron's on the ice with them, or I'm drawing a complete blank on the other guy, Adam Nicholas. Like those guys are always on the ice. They're always around for these guys. The resources are being put into to player development. Mark Elliott, I see Bolduc taking a spot on PK to replace Armia and Dvorak, and maybe trying Newhook there too. I'm not sure about Bolduc on the penalty kill. I don't think he's ever really had any experience killing penalties. I think he's more likely to get time on the power play, to be quite honest. I think you're going to have to see, maybe a guy like Gallagher get a chance to kill some penalties. I think Newhook is a good candidate with his speed to kill penalties. So yeah, I think you're more likely to say. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I don't think that the Canadiens are going to put that out of it's not like it's not possible. I think they'll consider it, and if Bolduc shows that he's capable of it, I think they're going to give him a chance. But I don't know that we'll see. Again, he's never done it before, but he's young, and he's certainly capable of learning new things. So T. Martin, did you see some of the guys in development camp? LJ Mooney, Tyler Thorpe, and Hayden Papanekis. Yeah, I agree. All three of those guys played well, especially in the game today. Michael Hage also had a pretty good camp, I thought. Who else? Yeah, I think it was a pretty good. I think it was a pretty good camp all around. And speaking of, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, but I will learn it. Hayden Papanakis, 69th pick for the Montreal Canadiens in the draft. Right-handed centerman from the Kelowna Rockets, 6'5", 202 pounds. So again, this is the Canadiens, possibly trying to address that size question. Again, as T. Martin points out, Papanekis had a really good development camp. He's right-handed centerman. Big boy, 6'5", 202. Will play next year in the Memorial Cup as Kelowna is hosting, so that'll be a good experience for him. He's a tough physical center with good puck skills, mobility, good skater, and has defensive upside. He, as is often the case with younger players, there's a little issue with his consistency, but he's a good shooter, good playmaker. Ranked 48th by hockeyprospects.com and 43rd by Elite Prospects. Just, the biggest complaint on him is typically his, the consistency of his not his effort necessarily, but his performance, I guess. But again, he's just fairly young kid, still has a lot of room, a lot of runway in front of him. And should be interesting to see. For his size at 6'5", he's a strong skater. And again, the Canadiens like these guys, right? The Canadiens like these unicorn types. This is, Hayden Papanekis is sort of this year's version of Florian Jacki. Big kid, strong, physical, who also has good tools. And so I think they view him that way. I think there was an article in The Athletic. I think it was The Athletic, Arpin Basu maybe, writing about Hayden Papanekis and what he brings. And I think, it'll be interesting to watch him develop. Again, we get a whole new batch of young kids to watch, right? Last year, we all were watching, Ivan Demidov playing KHL hockey. We were watching Tyler Thorpe and Owen Protz and Logan Sawyer. And now we've got, we add, Jarofsky, and we add LJ Mooney. We'll be watching University of Minnesota games with LJ Mooney, and we'll be watching the Kelowna Rockets if we're inclined to do that and see how Hayden Papanekis does. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm probably not, but I'll learn the proper pronunciation. So Dax asked, does Kent give Galley a contract once it ends? William Trudeau played well. That's not William Trudeau, Dax. It's a different Trudeau that was playing in the development camp. William Trudeau wouldn't have been in the development camp. But he did just sign a new contract with the Laval Rocket, so he will be back with the Rocket this year. Does Kent give Galley a contract once it ends? I mean, I think anything's possible. By the time Gallagher's contract ends, he'll be a pretty entrenched player in the in that group. Like, there'll be a lot of, he'll have a good connection to those guys, and I think they'll like him in the, certainly he's not going to get paid the same amount of money he is now. I mean, but if you kept him on a 2-year contract at a couple $1 million a year to be a fourth line player or a 13th forward who, with leadership and whatever, maybe, but I don't know. We'll see. We did talk about the Dobson trade, outdoor guys. We did. Maybe you can go back and watch it. I'm going to post the live once we're done. You can go back and watch it. But again, I guess just to summarize, I mean, I'm quite happy with the AAV at $9.5 million over 8 years. Certainly that AAV will be very reasonable 8 years down the road, presuming that the salary cap continues to increase, which, you know, I think we can all say it likely will. Giving up Emil Heineman and 2 first-round draft picks. You know, Emil Heineman's a good hockey player, but he's not, you know, the hardest guy in the world to replace. In the first 2, you know, the 2 draft picks in a mediocre draft, I think, you know, was something the Canadiens were willing to do. So, but if you want more detail on it, you know, you can certainly go back and watch the replay later. But getting back, I forgot to put up my graphics, guys. So we have a graphic here for Mr. Hayden Papanekis. So this is, you know, a little bit of information about him if you're interested. I also have one for Jarofsky. So again, Papanekis, right-handed center, Kelowna Rockets, 6'5", 202. You see his ratings, his tool grades there from Elite Prospects. They don't give, you know, those numbers may look pretty average. So basically it's a 1 to a 9 grading. They don't, you know, they don't give out 7s very often or 8s. So, you know, when you're getting 6.5s for physical and other things, you know, those are not, you know, those are pretty decent ratings. So like just to give Jarofsky by comparison, you know, Jarofsky has a 7 for his puck handling. But he's, you know, 6s and 5s for the most part across the board. So I thought it was a bit high for Dobson, but then I saw Bouchard get 10.5. Sheesh, yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think that Bouchard is overpaid at 10.5. To be fair, but I don't have any problem at 9.5. I mean, at 9.5 right now, he's about 10% of the cap. Next year, it'll be more like 9% of the cap. So, Atos Koivu, decent player. I mean, he's got a long road ahead of him if he's going to play for the Montreal Canadiens, I think. He certainly has the pedigree as Saku Koivu's son. He had a pretty decent camp, I would say. Yeah, I mean, he's got, you know, he's going to have all of the opportunities, right? He's got all of the resources and all the opportunities to make it, and you know, it's just a matter of whether he can do that. Could I see Bolduc playing with Anderson and Galley and then dropping Newhook down to the 4th? Well, you don't have a centerman there, unless you're saying that Bolduc is going to center Anderson and Gallagher. I mean, again, I'm not going to predict who the you know, what the lines are going to be for the Canadiens. I mean, I really don't have any idea. To me, Jake Evans is the 4th line center. I think your 3rd line center probably is somebody like Owen Beck or Kapanen. So I don't see Bolduc playing center with any significant way. I mean, maybe Newhook is your 3rd line center. I don't know. But I don't know why you would drop Newhook down to 4th. You're confusing me a little bit with your question, I guess. I mean, again, I'm not going to predict the lines, but I don't see them having 3 wingers on a line together like that, and I don't see them putting Newhook to be the center on the 4th line when Jake Evans would be down there. So I'm not sure I'm getting where you're going with that, Tristan. But I mean, we'll see after training camp who ends up where. I see Bolduc possibly getting a chance to play some on the 2nd line. Again, if Bolduc is on your 3rd line, I think your roster is pretty good. I think your roster is pretty good. All right, next up, guys, we have Bryce Pickford. So Bryce Pickford is a right-handed defenseman from the Medicine Hat Tigers. Let's stand by. The story is that he is a former defenseman who was moved up front and has turned into a bit of a goal scorer. We see his numbers there. Really good shot, sharpshooter, 6 rating in shooting. the rest of his game needs work. His skating isn't the best, and he certainly needs to work on that. He'll get the opportunity to do that. We'll see what his Medicine Hat team looks like next year, whether or not the team sticks together. Obviously, the team went on a run this year and went to the Memorial Cup, but it looks like not everybody's going to be back, and so we'll see what that team looks like next year. Excuse me, but he's a bit of a late bloomer. I think he still has a long runway in front of him. Obviously, he's not looking at being in the NHL anytime soon. If he does make the NHL, it'll probably be a number of years down the road. But again, another bit of a long shot. And when you're picking later in the draft, that's the kind of thing you're looking for, right? You're looking for the boom or bust guy. 6'1", 185 pounds. Good compete level. Skating is decent. Good hockey sense. But yeah, skating is a little bit weak and can probably work on that. What's my thoughts on the recent rumors that the Habs are in the mix for Veleno? I don't love Veleno. Frankly, I lost any respect I had for him when he tramped on the back of Nino Niederreiter's leg at the World Championships a few years ago. So I'm not a huge Joe Veleno fan. I'm not sure what the rumors are. I think the rumors came out of the fact that he was on the ice with Demidov and a couple of the other guys last week after he was released by the Blackhawks. I think, yeah, Blackhawks. So I'm not sure that the rumors have a whole lot of validity to them. Whether it's anything we really need to take seriously in any way. Is he somebody that the Canadiens could use? Maybe. If he's willing to, take on a fourth line type role or be a guy who sort of, I don't know. I mean, does he have value? I suppose if you can get him for really, really cheap for $1 million and he's willing to take on, a more defensive type role, maybe, but I don't know. I don't see it. If Doc gets injured again, is it time to give up on him? Well, I don't think they're going to give up on him because he's injured. I mean, they're not going to, I don't know. Do you sign him to a new contract if he has another, full year, injury? Yeah, maybe. I don't think that hockey teams are in the habit of giving up on players, because of injury. They'll give up on him if they don't feel he can help the team anymore. Bolduc has played almost 100 games at center, and Newhook could go to left wing, and Evans at 4C. Bolduc has not played 100 games at center in the NHL. He may have played some center in junior hockey, and maybe even at the AHL level, but he hasn't played a ton of center. I saw him interviewed the other day. He was asked about it. We'll see. Again, are you going to put Bolduc as your third line center over Newhook, over Evans, over what are we talking about here? Dylan Verardo. There was a tweet from Tony Marinaro, grain of salt, absolutely, that Colorado, Montreal, and Nashville are essentially the three teams Veleno is deciding between, and apparently all three teams want him as well. Yeah, I mean, again, I would take anything Tony Marinaro says with a grain of salt. In fact, I would take anything you get from any of the media with a grain of salt, because honestly, they don't really have any real idea. Certainly, they're not getting the Canadiens are not leaking. They're not getting information from the Canadiens about the Canadiens' interest in Joe Veleno. If there's an interest there, it's coming from likely Joe Veleno's camp, and Joe Veleno or his agent or someone within his camp is probably trying to, beef up the market a little bit for him, maybe get him a little bit more money. I don't know that the Canadiens would be interested in Joe Veleno. I don't know that he makes any sense for what they're trying to do. Do you bring him in on a PTO? give him a tryout, maybe. But I don't see them signing Joe Veleno to a contract. I don't think it makes any sense. He's not the kind of guy that fits into their program. There's a number of reasons why he doesn't really fit into their program. So I don't see Joe Veleno as being an option for the Canadiens. I'd be surprised. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but I'd be really surprised. What's up, Spectre Dad? What's up, Lucky? I see you guys over there on TikTok. All right, guys. The next draft pick for the Canadiens was at number 82. And that was the goaltender from Belarus, Mr. Arseny Radkov, left-handed catching goaltender from the NHL, Tuimen Jr., Tuimensky. Again, another big boom-bust guy, right? A bit of a wild card guy who could go either way. We saw him a little bit at the development camp this week. Didn't look amazing, but had some. There were certainly some positive signs. Hockey Prospects has him ranked 7th amongst the goalies. Yeah, I mean, again, another boom bust guy, right? A guy who's very early on. He's a goaltender, so again, goalies take a really long time to develop. So for him to get better, we shall see. I believe he's playing. Is he playing U.S. college next year? Let me just. For some reason, I have it in my head that he's playing in the NCAA next year, but I could be completely wrong about that. Yeah, he's going to the university. He's going to UMass next year, so that'll be good for him, right? So he'll have a good opportunity to develop at UMass. He'll get all the benefits of playing in the NCAA, the resources of a big program, training, physical, working out in the gym. He's a big boy, 6'3", 198 pounds. I think that playing in the NCAA will certainly help with his progress, and he'll get to play against some really good competition. So again, another guy we'll get to watch next year. We'll be watching UMass games. Last year we were watching Boston College. The year before that we were watching Boston University. This year maybe it will be, it'll obviously be Michigan with Michael Hage, but maybe we'll watch a little bit of UMass as well. How many games has Bolduc played at center then? For me, it says 97. I don't believe he's played any games at center in the NHL, Tristan. I don't know where you're getting your numbers from. He was not a center in St. Louis last year. I don't. Maybe you and I have a different source for our stats, but I don't. Dylan, I personally don't want Veleno. I don't think he fits our scheme and the build of our team, and I would rather work our own youth players in the lineup and see what NHL prospects. I agree completely, Dylan. I think Joe Veleno is a perfect example of what Jeff Gorton has talked about in the past about not bringing in guys who will block the road or block the avenue for young prospects to come to the NHL. I think I'm with you. I would much rather see, them give a young player down in the American Hockey League a chance, even if he struggles a little bit at the NHL level, than bring in a guy like Joe Veleno to play in the NHL. Again, getting back to Radkov, he's a large, raw, athletically gifted goalie, really good reflexes, technically sound. Didn't play a ton of hockey last year, so there's not a lot to go on. He's a big kid and moves well for a kid his size. Again, boom bust type guy, kid who could really develop into something special, or might not make it at all. So we'll see for sure. Joshua Roy, Dax is asking about Joshua Roy. Do we see Joshua Roy making the lineup? Well, I mean, not to be flippant about it, but I think that's going to be up to Joshua Roy, right? I think he has the talent. I think he has the ability. I think he'll be given the opportunity. to play in the NHL, right? He has struggled the last couple of years. Let's be honest about it. He didn't have a great camp last year. And, while he didn't have a terrible year in Laval, he didn't have a great year either, right? He didn't force the Canadiens to call him up. He didn't, you didn't make it so that they had no other option but to bring him up. So, I think I certainly could envision a scenario where Joshua Roy shows up to camp next year and, plays well enough to make the team. But I think it's also possible that, he doesn't have what it takes to make the team. And, unfortunately for him, the longer he lets it go, the more likely he'll get squeezed out, and the harder it will be for him to make it, right? Like, those spots will eventually go to other players if he doesn't claim it, right? He's had the chance to claim it, and if he doesn't, then there's guys who are coming in behind him who will pass him, like guys like Florian Jacki and Owen Beck, and these guys will eventually surpass him, and eventually the competition will be a lot harder for those spots, and instead of him going in and competing for a spot that's open, he'll be going in trying to take a spot away from somebody, which is always more difficult. So I'm not going to say the time is running out on Joshua Roy, but certainly I think it would be in his interest his best interest to if he's going to make that move to the next level, he's going to have to do it sooner rather than later. So next on our list would have been LJ Mooney, John Mooney, Little John. If you guys didn't see it, LJ stands for Little John. His father's name is also John, so as a kid he was always called Little John. His father, by the way, was a hockey player as well. And so his entire life he went by LJ, or Little John, which I thought would be cool. We should start calling him, give him the nickname in Montreal. We should call him TJ for Tijan. I don't know if that'll pick up or if that'll go anywhere, but I thought that would be kind of cool if he, again, I guess it depends on whether he sticks around Montreal for any length of time, but Tijan would be a cool nickname for a Montreal Canadiens kid. I think he has a big opportunity to be a pretty special player. Again, his size will be his biggest hurdle, but we'll see if he can overcome that hurdle. He wouldn't be the first one to overcome it. We've watched, obviously, another player overcome it recently. Sorry, I'm just trying to find LJ Mooney. Yeah. Small but physical, good tools. We see his numbers there. Skating is, pretty high level. Handling is high level. We'll see. We'll see whether he can translate that to the NHL at his size. My concern with Roy is there comes a point where you're giving opportunities and players aren't taking it, and because of that, other players are missing chances. At some point, you've got to move on. Yeah, I agree with that. But again, what is that point, Dylan, right? There is a point where you have to move on. But again, you have to understand that not every player develops at the same rate as others, right? Some guys are late developers. Some guys, Lane Hudson jumped into the NHL as a 20-year-old defenseman and was like a duck to water. Not everybody does that. Some kids take longer. So you can, some point you have to move on. But I think you want to move on when you're as certain as you can be that it's not going to work out, right? You want to give these kids an opportunity, and frankly, I mean, unless somebody comes around asking to trade for him, there's no real reason to get rid of him. I mean, he can, he is what he is. But again, it's all about assessing the player and determining whether or not he has the ability to become something. And you're right, he's been given opportunities and he hasn't met them yet. But at what point do you give up on him? So anyways, here's LJ Mooney, guys. As I said, he's going to University of Minnesota next year. Will be taken to the next level. We'll see how he handles things in the NCAA. Next on the list is another goaltender. We got some questions here first. Give me a second. Let's go here and here. If you don't see Bolduc at center, where does he have a chance? Anderson and Galley have been decent together on that third line, and I believe if healthy, Laine and Demidov will be the second line centers. You mean they'll be the second line wingers? I have no idea, Tristan. I don't know what the roster is going to look like. I don't know what the lineup's going to look like. I think I could envision a scenario where Evans and Gallagher, you've got Evans, Gallagher, and Anderson on a fourth line, and you've got a third line with Kapanen and Bolduc and Newhook. I could see that. I could see a second line with Laine, Demidov, and Doc. I could see a second line with Demidov, Doc, and Bolduc, perhaps, with Laine on the third line. I think Laine is probably better served being on the second line, if I'm being honest. But again, I don't know. A lot of things are going to happen at the at training camp, and guys are going to earn spots, and guys are going to lose spots, and we'll see how it plays out. There's a lot of runway between now and the first game next year. A lot of things can happen. Players can get hurt. I'm not hoping that on anybody, obviously, but anything's possible. So for me, there's certain players who fit certain. Sorry, I'm trying to find something here. Who fit a certain role better than others. Like I said, to me, I don't see Laine being a prototypical third liner per se because of the style of hockey that he plays. To me, a third liner has to have a little bit more defensive game. So we'll see. Do I see Blais playing fourth line again? We'll see. We'll see how things go at the at training camp. Is Blais, is Samuel Blais a fourth liner? Is he a 13th forward? Is he in the American League? Right? Don't know. Maybe he has chemistry with Bolduc. Who knows? I don't know why he would, but he could. He played all last year in the American Hockey League. So, is it likely that he'll make the NHL? I see him being not unlike Alexandre Barré-Boulet last year, right? If you need him at the NHL level, you got him. But I mean, who's he? Who? If Blais makes the team, who doesn't? Like who is he making the team ahead of? Adam, I answered that question before. So Adam asks again, as a Leafs fan, what can we expect from Michael Pezzetta? Again, what you can expect from Michael Pezzetta is 100% effort all the time. In practice, in games, he'll be a 100% team guy, and he'll give 100% every single second he's on the ice. Not the most skilled guy in the world. He's not going to be, you're not going to light up the net. He's not going to, but he'll give you everything he has, effort-wise, shift in and shift out. Blais is essentially our new Pezzetta. Not sure there's actually much chemistry with Bolduc. Should be in the minors, helping younger players take that pro path. Yeah, again, it'll depend on what he shows up with at training camp, right? I think, like you said, I think his best case scenario is he's a fourth liner. I think the more likely scenario is that he, plays that 13th forward role. The unfortunate thing is he's not going to be he'll be on a one-way contract, so he won't be able to, he's not a guy who you'll be able to just ship up and down from Laval, similar to with Pezzetta last year, right? So we'll see how that goes. The next guy up, guys, is another goaltender, local kid, Alexis Cournoyer. A really interesting path to the draft for this kid. Played really well for Cape Breton in the Quebec League last year, which is essentially what got him drafted, but started the season last year in the Maritime Junior A League. You don't often see players from that league make it to getting drafted. To be quite honest, he was playing with the Truro Bearcats. Truro is my hometown where I was born. You see it there on the graph. He played 21 games with the Truro Bearcats this year, and he played 21 games with the Cape Breton Eagles. The Metro Junior A League would be sort of, I mean, technically on the same level with the BCHL and, the other Junior A leagues around the country, but probably not quite at the same level talent-wise. Just a kid who literally just, did enough in the last half of the season to get a team to pick him. 145th left-handed catching goaltender, 6'3", 195. Also apparently did enough to get himself a scholarship to go to Cornell University, right? So he'll be playing at Cornell next year. So again, much like Radkov, he'll get an opportunity to take advantage of the resources that come with the NCAA. A good program in the NCAA, he'll get a chance to, use their gym and all that good stuff, all that stuff that comes with being in the NCAA, not playing a ton of games. So that'll be good for his development. Probably not a high-level prospect for the Canadiens, to be quite honest, but he's a guy who could, the progress, the rapid progress that he made this year as a late bloomer. He's a smart kid. Kind of reminds me sort of a little bit of, again, not on the same level, but a Zach Fucali, like a smart kid who studies the game, has pretty good tools, and, smart kid, off the ice as well. We'll go to Cornell, and again, hopefully, we'll take advantage. Self-awareness, right? I talked about earlier, a kid who, recognizes what he needs to do to make it to the NHL, and we'll hopefully try that next year. So again, not a guy who we're likely to see at the NHL level ever. Certainly not anytime soon, quite honestly. I mean, but somebody worth taking a shot on, and if he can, make that jump, then good for him. I think he's a guy who, again, a long shot, lottery ticket, right? You buy a lottery ticket, and maybe he turns into something incredible that you never expected. So I think we can say that about a few of the Canadiens picks. Probably, I think you could say that about Radkov. You could probably say that about Cornway. You can certainly say it about the guys we're still yet to talk about. I think LJ Mooney is probably on a little bit of a higher level than that. I mean, I think LJ Mooney's upside is a little bit better. I think it's more than just a lottery ticket with him. But when you're picking later in the draft, that's kind of what you're looking for, right? Guys with high upside who, can boom or bust, and you hope that they boom. Playing imaginary manager. Okay, I like playing imaginary manager. Let's see what this question is. Playing imaginary manager, would we look to give an opportunity to Farrell? Started slow last year in Laval, then finished red hot. Should we look at an opportunity to him and see what he can do? Well, again, Dylan, all of these guys are going to be at camp, right? The Canadiens are going to have a training camp in September, and everybody's going to be there, right? Sean Farrell's going to be there. Arbor Jacki is going to be there. Luke Tuck's going to be there. All of these guys are going to be there. So everyone's going to get an opportunity to show what they're made of. And is Sean Farrell going to get a better look because of what he did last year? Absolutely, right? He had a great season. As you say, certainly the second half for sure was fantastic. Like beyond good. It was fantastic. So I mean, the fact that he did that, I think will. The Canadiens, certainly drafted him to be a good player. He was a high-rated player when they drafted him. He obviously struggled his first year. He had some injuries. He struggled the first half of last year, but then he really lit things up. So, that in and of itself will give him, what's the right word? It'll be there'll be more shine on him, I guess, showing up at camp. And, I think the Canadiens management will be a little interested to see what he brings in light of his performance in the second half of last year. But, if he shows up and doesn't really perform at training camp, then he'll likely find himself back in the American Hockey League. If he comes in and is spectacular, I do think they will give him an opportunity. And I've said this before. I think that, Sean Farrell is, if he comes in and plays well enough and, as good as he's capable of playing, he could be in consideration to play that second center role. He has the pedigree. He was a second-round draft pick. He was pretty small. I think he was actually not picked. I think he was picked. Let's see exactly where Sean Farrell was picked. Sean Farrell was drafted. Yeah, so he's a 4th-round draft pick, but had again, probably not dissimilar to an LJ Mooney, right? Small, 5'9", tons of talent, tons of skill, smart kid, understands the game, not as physical as LJ Mooney, but, a ton of talent. Like had, 53 points in 34 games in his last year at Harvard, right? Those are Lane Hudson numbers. Those are, that would have been, I don't know off the top of my head, but that would have been near the top of the NCAA in points, right? Had 101 points in the USHL in 53 games. So, pretty good hockey player, capable, very, very capable offensively. So if he's able to keep, rolling with what he did last year in Laval and bring that to training camp, then I think he's going to be somebody to consider. So the last guy, well, it's not the last guy. The last guy we have a graphic for of the Canadiens draft picks is Carlos Hendel, drafted 177th overall, right-handed defenseman from the Halifax Mooseheads in the Quebec the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League. 6'1", 174 pounds. Again, another long shot, smooth skating kid. Doesn't really stand out anywhere, but is pretty solid across the board. He's a pretty steady guy, not overly large, smallish defenseman. If he was 6'5", I think he probably would have been drafted significantly higher. If he was, like some of the guys we've already talked about. Pretty smart kid again, good hockey sense, pretty self-aware, understands the game, understands what he needs to do to be a better player. Decent offense, little, not a bad defensive defenseman, but just again a pretty, I don't want to call him vanilla or boring, but he's just a guy who is not great at anything but is good at everything. Obviously, being drafted 177th, he's not, likely to do much at the NHL level. But we'll see. Ranked 104 by Elite Prospects and 110 by the hockeyprospects.com. Frank, still need a high win percentage left shot center for D-zone. No, they don't need that, Frank. Would it be nice to have that? Yes. Is it possible that they will have that? Yes. But they don't need that. We'll see. But again, if the goal is for them to win the Stanley Cup this year, then yes, they need that. But that's not the goal. The goal is not to win the Cup this year. It's not even to win the Cup next year. The goal is to get better, to improve on last year. And, you can't fix all of your problems and you can't solve everything all in one off season, right? You can't sort of, you can't sort of make a list of the 5-10 things that are wrong with your team and go out and fix them all by making trades and signing unrestricted free agents. That's not, it's not the way it works, first of all. And second of all, it's a recipe for disaster, especially in a team that's rebuilding. So, I think they'll that might be something they struggle with this year, right? That might be something they'll struggle with this year. But there's going to be things that they struggle with this year. They're not going to have a perfect team. They're not going to have a team that's good at everything, right? They're not. That's just not going to happen. So there's going to be areas of the game where, they're not awesome at it. And, they don't, in a rebuild, your goal is to improve year on year and to develop from within your organization. And it's not to go out and just, fill all of your holes and solve all of your problems by signing, unrestricted free agents and bringing in, veteran players to fill those holes, right? So, if this year passes and they still need a left-handed, centerman who, can win faceoffs, then maybe next year that's a problem to be solved because, or maybe somebody within the organization, fits that role or gets there. So, again, it's not a need. Yeah, you want to have centermen who win faceoffs. Absolutely. Right. The more centermen you have, the more faceoffs you win, the better. But, there's going to be holes on this team, and, most teams have holes, and, you can't just go and fill every one of your holes with, with veterans and guys that you get in trades or signing free agents. Dylan, I think a really cool segment on your live would be going through our prospect pool and giving a ceiling versus floor for each player, especially for people who are fairly baseline Habs fans. Yeah, again, like I haven't really done much in the off season yet, Dylan, but I have done that, and typically, when I do the Habs Therapy Day show in the season, I do a segment on the prospects. I don't focus specifically on ceiling and floor. Honestly, I don't really probably have the ability to do that with a lot of the players. I just don't have the knowledge. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of resources out there, and I love talking about this stuff, and I have a little bit of an understanding about some of these guys, and I've been doing my research. I was fortunate enough to do a show with Jerome Berube, who is one of the scouts at hockeyprospects.com. If you want to watch that show, you can watch it. It's on my YouTube page. He had some really good insights about some of these players before the draft. I mean, it's tough to watch the show now because we obviously were talking about 16 and 17 picks, and the guys that the Canadiens might be interested in at that spot. But thanks, Frank. But yeah. I do my research and I enjoy talking about it, and I like reading about it and watching videos and doing all that good stuff. So, but yeah, I certainly as we continue to do this show, Habs Therapy Day, I think we will certainly spend some time on the prospects. It's one of the fun parts of being the fan of a rebuilding team. I know rebuild is a bad word in a lot of markets, and the fans aren't going to be interested in the team if you're rebuilding, and losing is not. But to me, one of the fun things about following a team that's rebuilding is that you do have, if the rebuild is being done right, you have a large group of prospects that are playing in various leagues around, and you get to follow them, right? So, like I said, last year I got to watch, Jacob Fowler play at Boston College. I got to watch Ivan Demidov play in the KHL. I got to watch Michael Hage play at the University of Michigan. So there was a lot of good hockey that I got to watch. The year before that, I got to watch Lane Hudson at BU, and so there's always guys to watch. Like this year, I think it'll be fun to watch, LJ Mooney play for the University of Minnesota. It'll be fun to watch. Obviously Laval is obviously, a good opportunity to watch good hockey as well. There's going to be a lot of, Canadiens prospects playing in the NCAA. There's going to be, we're going to have another prospect playing in the KHL likely in Alexander Zhuravsky will probably be playing for UFA in the KHL. So, that's one of the fun things about being a fan of a rebuilding team or a team that's in a rebuild, is that beyond the NHL team, there's a lot of things to watch and get excited about. And if you're inclined to watch that much hockey and you enjoy watching that much hockey, then it's fun. Even if the Canadiens are, finishing dead last in the league like they did a couple years ago, there was room to be excited and optimistic, if you were watching, some of their prospects. I can see the passion you have on our boys. I share it as well. Part of the reason I keep following and watching, because it's good fun to chat about everything in our organization. Yeah, and that's, to me, to be honest with you, I had lost a lot of my interest in the Montreal Canadiens and in hockey, those last couple of years of Marc Bergevin, because I just, the organization was going nowhere. There was no real vision. There was no real plan for making the team better. Obviously, the team went to the Stanley Cup final in the COVID year, which was fun and great to watch, but it, frankly, was a bit of a fluke. And I wasn't really following the Canadiens that closely that year. But when the rebuild came along, and Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton came in, and the way they've communicated their plan, and the way they've stuck to their plan, and the way they've abandoned not just the way things have been done for a long time in the Canadiens organization, but I've also abandoned a lot of the traditional ways of managing hockey teams generally in the NHL, and abandoned some of those old school mentalities, has really, really turned me back on to watching the sport and watching the game, and following it even more closely than I ever have. And so I really, it's not just it's just not just the games that are fun to watch. It's the press conferences. It's, like I said, all of the, the prospects playing, all of the, watching the Laval Rocket play, listening to Kent Hughes talk about the team, and getting hints and clues from him about what the organization is trying to do, and what, the long-term plan is, and doing shows like this, where I get to talk to fans who, of varying levels of understanding, varying levels of interest. And some guys are, like you say, the baseline fans who may not know who Michael Hage is, or may not know or spend as much time following as other fans do. So I enjoy it, and obviously I've sat here. It's been over 2 hours now, talking to you guys about this tonight, and I've been wanting to do this show for some time, and it's just been pushed back more and more and more and more. And I'm finally getting to do it, and I'm going to stay here as long as I have to chat with you guys. So the last two guys that the just getting back to the draft guys, the last two guys that the Canadiens drafted, unfortunately, there's no real profile on them anywhere, because they weren't really ranked in the top 125 or so by any of the major organizations. So Andrew McNeil was drafted at 189. He's a right-handed defenseman from Kitchener, the Kitchener Rangers in the OHL, 6 foot, 396 pounds. If you guys were following the development camp, or if you watched the inter-squad game today, you would have seen him play. Struggled a little bit, I thought, in the inter-squad game today, as well as in the some of the drills yesterday at practice, as I understood it. Again, this guy will be a long shot, big defenseman, big rangy defenseman. We'll see. We'll see where he goes, right? But again, when you're picking guys at 189, you're not really hoping for too much, but again, you hope that he can do something. And the last pick was Maxon Vig. Played in the USHL last year for Cedar Rapids. Big boy, 6'2", 212. If you want to watch some fight videos, there's some fights. He's got some fights in the USHL last year. He'll be playing at Bemidji State next year, so he'll obviously get an opportunity to improve there, much like the other NCAA guys that we talked about earlier. Again, big, tough kid. Does he translate that to the next level? We'll see. So, much like all the other prospects, he's going to be a guy who, may or may not make the move to the next level. So that's it on the draft, guys. If you have any questions about any of those players, I have some knowledge about, most of them. If you have any specific questions about, I know LJ Mooney obviously is going to get a lot of attention because of what he did at the the development camp, plus the interviews that he had. And I think he's a a pretty special kid. But if you have questions about any of the other guys, I'm happy to answer them as best I can. Next topic, again, keep the questions coming, guys. I want to talk as much with you guys. There's not a ton of questions. Dylan and I are having a bit of a two-way conversation here. I know Tristan had some questions earlier. People are probably coming and going. If you're watching in a replay, guys, if you're watching the show after the fact, feel free to post your questions down below. I will do my best to get to them afterwards, and I definitely will respond. If you're not, following, please subscribe down below. There's a button down below to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. If you haven't yet done so, we've only got the 5 thumbs up so far. Yeah, if you are inclined to ask any questions, feel free to fire away. I'm happy to answer. Like I said, I'd much rather have conversations with you guys than just talk to myself here. So I see Coach Frenchie is live. Coach Frenchie's live probably every single day. So some of the people that usually follow me are probably over watching his show. But you can't do anything about that. So yeah, development camp. What do you guys think? I think it's, there's a pretty clear consensus that there were a few guys who really were impressive at the development camp. We already talked about Lil John Mooney and what he did at camp. I thought he had a pretty special camp, and I think he turned some heads. And like I said, it'll be interesting to see how he develops over the next few years. Michael Hage also looked pretty, what's the right word? He played up to the level you would expect for a guy who was, a first-round draft pick last year, was arguably the best the best freshman in the NCAA last year. So you would kind of expect that from Michael Hage. So yeah, he played quite well. Tyler Thorpe, 2 goals today in the inter-squad game. Yeah, looked great. Tyler Thorpe's an interesting guy, right? Drafted last year, in the later rounds, much like we talked about, about this year's draft. Like one of those guys who you take in the later rounds, and you hope that you take 3 or 4 guys, and you hope that one of them hits, right? And Tyler Thorpe looks like he might be one of those guys. He's got a contract in the AHL next year. Big kid, tough kid. Was learning to use his physicality a little bit better. I didn't realize this. I was reading an article about him earlier today that he was a kid who grew like 7 or 8 inches in 3 or 4 years, and went from being one of the smallest kids around to one of the biggest kids. He's 6'4", 6'5" now. So again, as is often the case, when you start small, you develop a lot of those skills and skating, puck handling, shooting, and whatever, and then you grow into a big body and you keep those skills, and now you have a big body to go along with it. That can be a recipe for success. And Tyler Thorpe has certainly done the most with what he has, and yeah, he did a really good job in the development camp both this year and last year, right? He did well at development camp and at the rookie camp last year. Had a good season with the Vancouver Giants. I can't remember his exact point totals off the top of my head, but scored a bunch of goals. I think he was right around, probably close to a point per game. I suppose I could check. He finished the season. I think he played 1 game with the Laval Rocket last year. Yeah, he had 2 assists in his 1 game with the Laval Rocket. He had 52 points in 68 games with Vancouver. So not just under a point game, but under a point per game. 69 penalty minutes plus 11. Yeah, interesting kid. Gonna be fun to watch. So, so Thorpe, Hage, Mooney, those would probably be the 3 guys that stood out to me. Those are the ones that I think people are mostly talking about. yeah, we'll see how it goes. The goaltenders didn't look that great to me today, whether it was Cornwall or Radkov or Vekvanix. Who was the fourth goalie? Who was the fourth goalie at the camp? I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah. Who else? Yeah, there were Papanekis looked good. Papanekis, yeah, looked decent as well. So yeah, fun to watch. Again, another reason why it's fun to watch. Young rebuilding team. You get to watch things like development camp and take an interest in that because the prospect pool does mean so much to the organization and does mean so much to the success of the team down the road. So, a couple last things to talk about, guys. Laval next year, right? I think one of the things that the Canadiens have done right in this rebuild is ensuring, as part of their internal development plan, is ensuring that they are that they take their American Hockey League team seriously and their East Coast team league as well. But Laval is not just an afterthought, right? It's not just a place to send guys who aren't good enough and to fish for guys who might they take their relationship with Laval Rocket and the Trois-Rivières Lions seriously, and they use it as a breeding ground for their young players and a place where you can learn to be a Montreal Canadien, right? So their coaching staffs work together. Their development staff work together. If you're in Laval, you're learning the same systems that you'll have to play in Montreal. So Laval is no longer, or the American Hockey League is no longer an afterthought for the Montreal Canadiens. The benefit of having the team be essentially in the same city. I know it's not technically in the same city, but essentially the same city, obviously has its benefits. And there's a lot more overlap between the two, the NHL team and the American Hockey League team, and I think that's a benefit too. But again, this week we saw, how seriously the Canadiens do take the Laval Rocket, and they went back and they re-signed. They brought Alex Belzile back. They brought back Toby Paquette-Bisson. Samuel Blais may or may not play there. If that is where he plays, he'll certainly bring some leadership and experience to that group. Mark Estapa, Ryan O'Rourke, Wyatt Wiley, Mark Delgazo. They brought in all these guys, right? And so they're not just, sort of recycling the same guys. So, they're bringing in some veterans to aid, to help the development of the younger players, the Owen Becks, the Florian Jacques, the Luke Tucks, the Sean Farrell, those guys. They're bringing, guys in who will help those guys come along, right? Raphael Harvey-Pinard is gone. Alex Barry-Boulet is gone. It looks like Tyler Wotherspoon's going to be gone. Hoffenmeyer, Bocage, Lindstrom, Zach Hayes, they're all gone. Caden Primo is gone. Again, maybe that's another topic if you guys want to talk about the goaltending situation, right? The Caden Primo is no longer in the organization. They did sign Capo Kakinen. So I guess it'll be interesting to see after training camp how the four goalies pan out. I think it's probably, Sam Montembeault certainly will have the inside track on the starting job in Montreal, and I think we would all expect him to get that spot. But stranger things have happened. But who's going to be his backup? Is it going to be Dobesh? Will it be Kakinen? Pardon me. Or does Kakinen go to the American Hockey League where he'll, I think we're relatively confident as well. I think that Fowler will get the majority of the ice time for Laval in goal. So, I think either way, Kakinen is likely to be a backup, but is it going to be in the American League or in the NHL? Would you rather have Dobesh be in the American Hockey League or in the NHL? I think probably you would rather him be in the NHL if he's going to be a backup. Dobesh is a good goalie too, right? He's a high level prospect goaltender. 6'5". What is he? 6'5", 6'6". That's a goalie who, is going to get all the chances in the world, like 6'4", 201, right? So with a frame like that, and he's a good goaltender. So I know there's a lot of focus on Jacob Fowler, but Jakub Dobesh is could be a number one goalie in the NHL someday too. You think it'll be Montembeault and Kakinen? Yeah. Again, I think it'll come down to training camp, Eve. But I think the Canadiens have an interest in Dobesh, developing Dobesh, and I think the best development opportunity for Dobesh is for him to be in the NHL. Because either way, he's not likely to start. I mean, unless they do a tandem type thing, where he and Fowler both play equal time in Laval, then maybe that happens. But we'll see. I mean, I don't think that Dobesh did anything last year to cost himself the backup spot. I think he did a fantastic job when he came up and replaced Caden Primo. But Caden Primo looked good early on too, and then struggled, and so we'll see. Kakinen, I think, is a good insurance policy, and they've got 4 guys who can play between Montreal and Laval. God forbid one of them doesn't get hurt. So what about next season, guys? Like, what are we? I mean, there's not a ton of conversation going on here, but do we have any thoughts on next season and what next season looks like? Are we happy with what the Canadiens management has done in the offseason? Are we happy with the moves they've made? Are we happy with the moves they haven't made? Do we want them to do more? We talked at length earlier about needs versus opportunities to make the team better. I don't think they have any needs, honestly. And I think that if you understand what they're trying to do with this rebuild, and if you understand what the ultimate goal of the rebuild is, then I think you get that there's no quote-unquote needs. And I think Kent Hughes certainly gets that, and he's not going to make any moves out of desperation or out of a sense of needing something. He's going to make trades out of, by sort of sifting through all of the opportunities that are out there and sort of picking and choosing the ones that he feels will help the organization, not just in the short term, but more so in the long term. So, in that sense, I'm happy with what's gone on this offseason. I think both the Dobson and Bolduc trades were, again, opportunities that Kent Hughes took advantage of. I think in both cases, the return, the cost versus what they got back, certainly positive, right? I mean, Dobson for 2 draft picks and Emil Heineman, we talked about it. I mean, more than reasonable price. I think you've signed him to a contract that's more than acceptable under the circumstances. Bolduc for Mailloux. Again, I'm not going to say that Bolduc is a better player than Mailloux, but certainly Bolduc fits within the organizational needs more so than Mailloux. And even if Mailloux goes on to great things, it doesn't change the fact that Bolduc is the right guy at the right time for this team. But again, none of us can tell the future. So Bolduc could be a superstar, or he could be a flop. Mailloux could be a superstar, or he could be a flop. But at the same time, you can't look at this trade in that lens. You got to look at it as right now, right? What is Bolduc right now? What is Mailloux right now? And Mailloux, as good as he is, and as good a future as he might have, he's a bit of a surplus for Montreal. Whereas Bolduc fits more of a need with the team, and certainly has a lot of potential as well. You think Bolduc is going to be a superstar? Yeah, he could very well be, Eve. Like, I mean, obviously last year, certainly in the second half of the season, he was fantastic. And if he plays at that level, he could be a great hockey player. And like I said, I think he has the potential to be a second line player in the NHL. But if he continues to develop from where he was last year, and he's on your third line, I think you've got a pretty special team, right? On a Stanley, he's a team that has him as a third liner, a team that has him playing the way he played in the second half of last season. If you have him on your third line, you're in the mix for the Stanley Cup. Yeah, he could, Eve. But again, I think the best teams are the teams who have guys who are good enough to play higher in the lineup, but are playing lower in the lineup, right? So if you have a guy like Bolduc, yeah, he's capable of playing on the second line. But if he's on your third line, that means your second line is pretty special and pretty good, right? I mean, maybe he is that good that you have no choice but to put him on your first or second line. But again, to me, the best teams are the teams who have guys who are playing above where they are in the roster, right? You're a third liner, but you're playing as good as somebody, who could, and obviously the roles of a third liner and a second liner are different, but if you're the best third liner in the league, your team's doing pretty good. I don't know where he's going to be slotted, Eve. I think it'll depend on training camp. So Eve is asking, do I think Blais is going to be slotted on the fourth line? We had that question earlier. I don't know. I mean, it depends on how things go at camp. If he does, who are you taking out of the lineup, Eve? Who does he replace in your lineup if Samuel Blais plays on your fourth line? I think for Blais, I think his best case scenario is probably being fourth line. But again, anything can happen at camp. But maybe he's more likely going to be a 13th forward, or a guy who goes down to Laval. But again, I'm not here to make pronouncements about the Canadiens roster because one, I don't have a clue, and two, I think it's all going to come down to training camp. One of the things that the Canadiens, I think, is part of their new philosophy is that they're willing to allow players to earn their spots. Right? It's a meritocracy. They're going to keep guys who earn it. They're not just going to keep guys because they've made a decision before camp or before anything. They're going to let these guys go out and fight it out, and may the best man win. So, speaking of the offseason, I think the only real thing, I think you might still see Kent Hughes make a move. Again, he's sifting through all of the opportunities, and if he pulls up his net and there's an opportunity in there that he thinks will help the Canadiens, I think that he'll explore it, and if it works out, then if he can make it work in a way that benefits the team, I think he'll do it. As he said at his press conference the other day, he's more than happy to head into the season with what he currently has, or what the team currently has. But that he's going to I think that Kent Hughes, one of the things that people don't realize, I think Kent Hughes' philosophy is that nothing is off the table. Nothing is off the table, right? He's not. I think if you asked Kent Hughes, I think he would tell you that he's not doing his job if he's not exploring every opportunity, or if he's rejecting any opportunity out of hand, right? If he's rejecting opportunities without giving them, any type of consideration or exploring them in any way, I think he would tell you that he wouldn't be doing his job in that scenario. So I think Kent Hughes is a guy who's on his phone all the time. I think he's a guy who, if he hears that a player is available, he makes that call no matter what, even if he, doesn't think it's, makes sense or is the right move. I think he explores everything for multiple reasons, right? It's, even if he doesn't feel like the player is, right for his team, having that conversation with another GM may have a benefit in another way, right? You may find out that they've got another guy that they're trying to trade, or it may allow you to build a relationship that will help you down the road where, you're in a negotiation with that that GM on another transaction. So I think Kent Hughes is a guy who is, willing to consider and does consider just about every possibility, which is why I think, you heard the Canadiens name, or the Canadiens as being part of so many rumors this summer, right? Every time there was a player, being discussed in a trade or whatever, the Canadiens name, the Canadiens are involved with, Sidney Crosby. The Canadiens are involved with Jonathan Toews. The Canadiens are involved with Jonathan Marchessault. The Canadiens are involved with Claude Giroux. The Canadiens are involved with this, with that. Well, yeah, because I think that when Kent Hughes hears that these guys are available, he makes that call. Whether he wants the player or not, he makes the call. He finds out what's going on, and like I said, even if he doesn't particularly have an interest in that player, doesn't really think that player would serve the Canadiens' interest, I think there's a benefit in him making that call because, one, he gets the better lay of the land. He gets to understand what's going on with, if he gets, if the word is that Pittsburgh is shopping Sidney Crosby around, then he's going to call Dubas up, and at the very least, he'll get some information about what the hell's going on, right? Is he really on the market? What are you asking for? Like, what's the return like for him? What, is he really willing to move? Is he willing to waive his no trade clause? Is he, you're getting information, even if you're not interested in having him on your team. You're accomplishing something, and you're gathering information, and information is super valuable. It's the same way that they interview players at the draft who they know they're never going to have an opportunity to pick, right? Right? Famously they met with Connor Bedard a couple of years ago at the draft, right? And a lot of people would say, well, that's a waste of time. Like, why are you meeting with Connor Bedard? Well, guess what? You're going to be playing against Connor Bedard for the next 15, 20 years. If you can get some insight into what the kid's like, that might help you down the road. That might have some value. Or maybe in 10 years from now, you want to make a trade for Connor Bedard, and you want to, know a little bit more about him. So, I think that this new one of the greatest skills, or the greatest things that this new organization or this new administration is bringing to the Canadiens is their thoroughness and the professional way in which they conduct their business. Right? They're not just a bunch of former hockey players who are, sort of making deals on the, by the seat of their pants with no real plan or no real long-term vision or agenda. They're running this organization like a business, right? With a business, with a vision, with a plan, with goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, and they've got philosophies and principles that they stick pretty closely to. Yeah, which I guess the last two things, contract extensions. Are we going to see contract extensions for Lane Hutson and Patrick Laine? What does everybody think about that? Well, that, you guys haven't been real talkative here tonight. Is that going to get you guys talking? Is that going to get the conversation going? I don't know that we're going to see a contract extension for Lane Hutson. I think that financially it makes more sense for Lane Hutson not to sign a contract extension right now. Obviously, if he has another year like he had this year or better, next summer he obviously has a better bargaining position and, can certainly ask for more money. Does he love playing in Montreal so much that he wants to get it done with and, just get locked in for 8 more years? 9 really. Is he that in love with the city and the organization and the idea of playing for the Canadiens that he, is willing to forego whatever additional money he might get by having another good season next year? Maybe. Right. One of the things I really paid attention to and noticed when he won the Rookie of the Year award was every time he was interviewed, every time he talked to anybody, he talked about the privilege of playing for the Montreal Canadiens and how great it is to play for the Montreal Canadiens. And, you can say that, that's just typical whatever, but players who win individual awards like that don't always talk about how much they enjoy the organization. They'll talk about their teammates and how important their teammates are, and they wouldn't have been able to do it without their teammates. But, the way in which he talked about, his love of playing for the Montreal Canadiens was, interesting. Interesting because, obviously one of the key aspects of the rebuild is sort of building an atmosphere, building an environment, building a group, a family that gets along, making Montreal a place where players want to come to. And I think part of that is inducing and convincing players to come to Montreal, to stay in Montreal, to give the organization, team-friendly deals when it comes contract time, a lot of that stuff. So I think that, am I being naive to think that Lane Hutson loves Montreal enough that, he'll forego some of his bargaining power, at contract time, or he'll take a little bit less money? Maybe, but there is a real sense of that, going around this organization right now, that they're a group that likes each other, that wants to stick together, that believes in the long-term plan and the long-term mission, and believes that, good things are happening and that, sticking around is probably to their benefit. I mean, Emil Heineman talked about, when he got traded, it being the worst day of his life. I think that's, what did he say? I want to get the quote right because that's not fair if that wasn't the quote, but Emil Heineman, worst day, somebody's, I can't find it. But something along those lines. He made it very clear that he, really liked being in Montreal and that he didn't, he wasn't that interested in leaving. So, we saw, Jake Evans, obviously his situation. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. Does Lane Hutson wait till next year? What does, Dobson's contract mean? I don't know. We'll see. I know it's a couple of days old, but how do you feel about Dobson on the Habs blue line? Can he help this team out? Can I get your thoughts? Sure, Owen. I mean, we talked about it earlier, so if you want to go back and check out what we said about the Dobson trade earlier, we talked about it, I don't know, probably about 30. We started talking about 30 minutes into the show. I think it's a good trade. Obviously, you never know what the player is going to turn into, but all indications are that Dobson is a solid, skilled first pairing defenseman. He's still young, so he still has a lot of work to do. But he's a big kid, skates well. First round draft pick, good pedigree, has a 70-point season under his belt. Probably could work a little bit on his defensive game still. But yeah, I think it's a good trade for Montreal. I don't think they gave up a ton to get him. They gave up, what we talked about. They traded from a place of strength, a place of surplus. They traded 2 draft picks, one of which they got for basically nothing in the Sean Monahan deal, and Emil Heineman, who was a guy they picked up in the Tyler Toffoli trade, and obviously an important part of the team, Emil Heineman, but not one who will be horribly difficult to replace. Like there's a lot of young guys coming up who can, take his spot. I mean, Heineman obviously had a really good first half of the season last year. Struggled a little bit after coming back from the injury he suffered when he was hit by the car in Utah, I think it was, Salt Lake City. So yeah, again, I think it's a good trade. Obviously, Dobson could turn into a complete flop. Like he could just fall off the face of the earth and whatever. But, I don't expect that to happen. And I don't think you can go into, as a general manager, I don't think you can go into a trade thinking that way. So yeah, I think it's a positive for the Canadiens. They filled what is, or they strengthened what would have been a weakness on the team from a place of, excess, right? They use something they have a lot of to get something they don't have a lot of. Same with the Bolduc trade, I guess, to a degree. So, so we're just talking about extensions. Patrick Laine. I know there's a majority probably of Canadiens fans who don't think that Patrick Laine should get a contract extension. I'm going to be, contrarian, but I truly believe that I think it would be a good move for the Canadiens to sign Laine to an extension. Obviously, depending on what the cost is, I don't think I would sign him to an $8.7 million contract extension right now. But all indications are that Patrick Laine wants to be in Montreal, that he feels more comfortable playing hockey in Montreal than he has anywhere else in his career so far. Whether or not that means he'd be willing to take less money to stay in Montreal or take a pay cut to stay in Montreal remains to be seen. I think Patrick Laine is an incredible talent. I think that as he grows more comfortable in his new environment and in his new sort of love of hockey, he'll continue to get better. I think he'll still have his struggles. I mean, mental health isn't something that you just fix like that. There's always going to be issues and setbacks. I think he also struggled with physical injuries last year, right? I don't think he fully recovered from the knee injury he suffered in the preseason. Obviously, his skating, it was quite clear that, he was not moving the way he typically does. So one hopes that he's training in the off season. I mean, I saw he just got married. He and his fiance were married in somewhere in Europe. I can't think where, Italy maybe. So as he, as his physical game improves, as his body, starts feeling, he's still young, right? He's not an old guy. People think he's so much older, but he's still, 27. So, he's got a lot of years ahead of him. I think if he comes to camp and he's feeling physically well and, his head's in the right space, I would have no problem with him being on the team at the right price. Again, I don't think I would give him $8.5 million, but if you could have him for, sign him for 4 years at $6 million, I'm all for that. Despite all of his struggles last year, he still was pretty important to the team, right? He was, he produced offensively, certainly on the power play. He turned the Canadiens' power play around. If it weren't for him, they probably don't make the playoffs. They certainly don't make the playoffs. It's not for him. And I think that if he, like I said, if he, can be physically healthier this year, I think that only, bodes well. And I think that the longer he plays, the longer he plays feeling good and happy to be playing hockey, I think, the better it will become. Now you're going to have to live with, the fact that, yeah, there's going to be times where he struggles, and I think that, as an organization, I think that the Canadiens understand that, his struggles don't, there's no like, he's not being lazy. He's not being, F this, when he struggles, he struggles, right? And, sometimes when his production's down and he's not playing his best, it's not because he's being lazy or he's not trying or he doesn't care or whatever, that there's other issues at play, which is, I think, one of the things that the fans often forget about Patrick Laine, right? Is I don't think this guy is like being he's not being a jerk. He's not being like, oh, I don't really care. Like that's what really kind of drives me crazy about some of the criticism that he's taken, right? I think, he's still going to struggle and he's still going to come off awkward, right? He's an awkward guy. He's a different guy. He's weird. He's not your typical pro athlete. Like he's not a guy, he's, not into the same things that, most hockey guys are into. Like he's different. And, I think you have to accept that he's different and not sort of treat all of his, peculiarities as, something that they're not, right? And the same thing happened with PK Subban, right? I mean, obviously, you have your own personal opinion about PK Subban, but, a lot of people got down on him because of how, he wasn't willing to sort of fall into the same mold that everybody wanted him to fall into. He didn't want to be like every other hockey player. He wanted to be different in some ways. And, that in a sport like hockey where, things are pretty conservative and traditional and whatever, that doesn't always fly. So I think I would have no problem with Patrick Laine being on this team for the, foreseeable future. I think that in order to do that, I think the Canadiens have already accepted that he's, that there's going to be some, issues and that they have to, live with some of those issues, whether it's mental health issues or whatever. But yeah, I have no problem with him being on the team. Do I think Kent Hughes will sign Laine long term, like $3 or $4 million range, if Kent doesn't want to give him like 7 or 8? Do I think Kent Hughes? Same question. Do I think Kent Hughes will sign Laine long term at like $3 or $4 million range? Hughes doesn't want to sign him to a $7 or $8 million deal, or will? I don't know. I don't know what he's going to ask for. And I mean, that's what I just kind of went through. Is like, I think that it appears that Laine wants to be in Montreal. I think that there's a benefit to him staying in Montreal. I think he sees it as a benefit. What dollar value he puts on that, I have no idea. I don't know. I think my sense is that as a guy who struggles with mental health, he probably puts a pretty heavy value, and not just, struggles with mental health, but is dealing with it, is an advocate for it, is, understands his mental health. I think, the value that he puts on playing in a place where he enjoys going to the rink, enjoys playing hockey. I think he'll put a strong value on that. Whereas, the other places he's played at during his NHL career, he didn't really feel that way, right? And so, do you want to make $8 million a year and hate your life? Or do you want to make $5 million a year and be happy with your job and go to work every day, feeling, pretty positive about it? So again, I don't pretend to know what's going on in his head. I don't pretend to know what his thought process is, but the indications that I've been able to see are that, he is pretty happy in Montreal. He likes the city. I think he likes the team. But again, as fans, I think it's on us to understand mental health, to understand that he's different, that he's not, cut from the same cloth that we typically expect to see our athletes cut from, that, just because he might come off awkwardly during an interview doesn't mean he's a jerk or that he's an asshole, or that he's whatever, or, that, he's a guy who's going to speak his mind. He's a guy who's into things that maybe we typically don't see from hockey players, the fashion, he's a different dude. And, you have to accept that. And, for a guy who's got the kind of talent he has, the benefit that the Canadiens could get, and again, it's not about that, I guess, but the benefit the Canadiens could get by accommodating him and recognizing that he's different and recognizing that he, has mental health. Like, let's be honest, hockey is not the best place or the most accommodating place for people who struggle with their mental health, right? It's seen as a weakness. It's seen as, a laziness. It's seen as, oh, you're not tough enough. You're not this, you're not that, you're not the other thing, right? Hockey, historically, and even now, isn't probably the easiest place to be when you're not comfortable in your own skin, or when you lack confidence, or when you, like, hockey players are expected to be these big, tough, strong, confident guys. And, I think the Canadiens, with their, quote unquote, kinder and gentler approach to the game, and to, this, the approach of, building a team and building a group, and, we have, we're a group that, gets along. We're a group, we heard Marty St. Louis talk about the guys loving each other. Like, when's the last time you heard, a coach or a manager talking about that, in a post-game interview, right? And so I think that the Canadiens can certainly, while I don't think they're, doing it strictly, as a way to take advantage of the situation, but I think there's certainly an opportunity there by looking outside the box or moving away from some of the traditional approaches to hockey. There's a way to benefit from that and to, to make your team better. So anyways, gang, I think that's going to be just about it for tonight. That's our off-season extravaganza marathon, right on about 2.5 hours. Didn't get as much conversation as I would have liked to, but I guess when I haven't been on the air for some time, it's tough. Not everyone's going to come out. If you're watching this in a replay, I do appreciate it as well. I know a lot of you probably went over to watch Coach Frenchie's show. He's a little bit more, or has been a little bit more consistent of late about being on the air, and I certainly understand that. But if you're watching in a replay, thank you very much. Hit the like button, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button down below if you're not yet a subscriber. What we try and bring here is a place where we can have a little bit deeper conversations about the Canadiens, staying away from sort of the rah-rah kind of stuff, or the your team sucks, my team's awesome. I try to take a bit of a deeper, more objective approach to the team, and, sort of dig a little bit deeper and below the surface on some of this stuff. So it's always great talking to you guys, and I do appreciate those who did come by and did participate and engage in the comments. Thank you so much. It's great to see that. And again, like I said, if you're watching in a replay, hit the thumbs up, hit the notification bell, make sure you subscribe, and feel free to ask questions in the comment section. I do have a look at them, and I certainly will answer them. If you have questions about the guys that the Canadiens drafted, we did, a bit of a brief run on those guys. But if I certainly know a little bit more if you want to talk some more about that. So I don't know when we'll go back on the air again. Probably in a couple of weeks again. Maybe do another show. There won't be a ton more to talk about. We covered a lot of ground here tonight. We talked about the series between the Capitals and the Canadiens. We talked about the quote-unquote needs, off-season needs of the Montreal Canadiens. We talked about the draft. We talked about the Dobson trade. We talked about the Bolduc trade. We talked about some of the signings, particularly at the minor league level for the Canadiens, the Laval. We talked about development camp, and we talked about sort of the rest of the summer and what that looks like, and what what next season might look like. So I had a really good time. I do appreciate all of you who came by. Thank you very much for popping in. And again, thank you as well if you're watching in a replay. It's always my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. Maybe you can tell, maybe you can't. But no, I do enjoy it. I do love talking about it. I love talking with you guys about it. I love hearing what you guys have to say, and I love having the debates and the conversations about it. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, like I said, thumbs up would be more than appreciated. And if you're not following, please subscribe. We're trying to grow our community. We want to get to 500 followers. It's a bit of a slog to get there. But every subscription counts and matters, and we certainly appreciate it. So enjoy the rest of your night. I will certainly enjoy mine. I hope that you guys did enjoy the show, and we'll definitely see you in the next one. Peace out.
Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, we want to be in that building on a Saturday night.